Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I decided to go camping alone to clear my mind. It was something I had done before, and I thought it would help with everything going on in my life. The campground I picked was in Utah, pretty isolated, surrounded by trees and a small lake not too far from where I set up. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. The first day was uneventful. I spent it setting up my tent, gathering firewood, and just taking in the quiet. The only sounds were the wind in the trees and the occasional rustle of something small in the underbrush. It was nice to be away from everything, away from people. As the sun started to set, I built a fire and cooked a simple meal. The crackling of the fire and the warmth against the cool night air were comforting. I sat there for a while, staring into the flames, letting my thoughts drift. It felt good to be alone, with no distractions, just the darkness and the fire. Eventually, I crawled into my tent, zipped up the flap, and settled into my sleeping bag. The quiet was almost overwhelming, but in a good way. I closed my eyes, listening to the faint sounds of the night, crickets, the breeze in the leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. I'm not sure how long I slept, but I woke up suddenly, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure why at first, just a vague sense that something was wrong. I listened, holding my breath, and that's when I heard voices outside my tent. They were low, murmuring, and close enough that I could tell they weren't far away. I froze, trying to make out what they were saying, but it was too quiet, like they were whispering on purpose. My mind raced, trying to figure out who could be out there. I was the only one in the area, or at least I thought I was. I sat up slowly, careful not to make any noise, and reached for the flashlight I had by my side. The voices kept going, but I still couldn't understand them. It was like they were talking just low enough to keep me from hearing. My hand shook as I unzipped the tent, just enough to peek out. The fire had died down, just a few glowing embers left, casting a faint light around the campsite. I didn't see anyone, but I could still hear the voices. They were closer now, almost like they were circling the tent. I knew I couldn't just sit there. I needed to see who it was, what they wanted. I took a deep breath, then unzipped the tent the rest of the way and stepped out, the cold air hitting me immediately. As soon as I was out, the voices stopped. Just like that. It was dead silent, except for the rustling of leaves in the wind. I stood there, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam around the campsite. Nothing. No one. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no answer. Just that eerie quiet. My heart was still racing, and I started to think maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was the wind, or the sounds of the forest, playing tricks on me. Then I saw him. A man standing at the edge of the trees, just barely visible in the darkness. He was watching me, his face mostly hidden in the shadows. I raised the flashlight, shining it on him, and he didn't move. He just stood there, staring. I asked him what he was doing, why he was out here so late. He didn't answer right away, just kept looking at me. Finally, he said he was lost, that he had been camping nearby and couldn't find his way back to his site. Something about him didn't feel right. His voice was calm, too calm for someone who was supposedly lost in the woods at night. But I didn't know what else to do. I told him to come closer, that I could help him, but he didn't move. He just stood there, looking at me with those dark eyes. Then he smiled, just a little, and said, "I'm fine now. Thanks." Before I could say anything else, he turned and walked into the trees. I watched him go, the beam of my flashlight following him until he disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I went back to my tent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The forest was too quiet now, the kind of quiet that makes you uneasy. I tried to lie down, to sleep, but I couldn't. I kept thinking about that man, the way he had just stood there, watching me. After what felt like hours, I got up again. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, deciding to check the area where I had seen him, to see if there was any sign of his campsite. I walked to the edge of the trees, where he had stood, and shone the light around. That's when I saw it. A small clearing, just beyond the trees, with a tent and a fire pit. The fire had been put out recently, the coals still warm. But the tent was empty, the flap hanging open, flapping slightly in the wind. I called out again, but there was no answer. I felt my stomach drop as I realized what was bothering me. The man had left, but he hadn't taken anything with him. His tent, his gear, everything was still there. It didn't make sense. I walked closer, shining the light into the tent. It was empty, just a sleeping bag and some clothes strewn about. I looked around, trying to find any sign of where he had gone, but there was nothing. Just that eerie silence. Then, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The fire pit. The coals were still warm, but there was no smoke, no smell of burning wood. It was like the fire had been put out just moments before I got there. I turned around, feeling like I was being watched again. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move in the trees. But when I looked closer, there was nothing. Just darkness. I backed away, my heart pounding, and started to walk back to my campsite. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that man again, or someone else. But the woods were empty, just the sound of the wind and the occasional rustle of leaves. When I got back to my tent, I didn't go inside. I couldn't. I grabbed my backpack, threw my gear together as quickly as I could, and started walking. I didn't care about the time, or the dark, or the rain that had started falling. I just wanted to get out of there. The whole way back, I kept hearing things, branches snapping, footsteps behind me, the sound of something moving just out of sight. But every time I turned around, there was nothing. Just that same eerie silence. I didn't stop until I reached my car, the rain pouring down now, soaking me to the bone. I threw my stuff in the back seat and jumped in, locking the doors behind me. I sat there for a moment, catching my breath, trying to make sense of what had happened. But I couldn't. All I knew was that something was wrong out there, something I didn't want to understand. I started the car and drove away, not looking back. The rain pounded on the roof, drowning out everything else, and I kept driving, not stopping until I was miles away. I don't know who that man was, or what happened to him. But I do know one thing, I'll never go camping alone again. It started with a knock on my door one rainy afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I live alone in a small apartment in Seattle. The kind of place where everyone keeps to themselves. When I opened the door, there was no one there, just a package on the floor, unmarked and plain, like someone just left it there in a hurry. I picked it up and brought it inside. It wasn't heavy, but it didn't feel empty either. Just a small, nondescript box with no return address, no label, nothing. It was strange, but I didn't think too much of it at first. I figured maybe it was a mistake, or someone sent it anonymously. I sat down at my kitchen table and opened it carefully. Inside, there were photographs, just a stack of pictures, nothing else. No note, no explanation. Just the photos. I flipped through them, and at first, they seemed ordinary. Pictures of the street outside my building, the coffee shop I go to, the park I walk through sometimes. But then I realized something that made my heart drop. The photos were of me. All of them. In every single picture, I was there. Walking to the coffee shop, standing at the crosswalk, leaving my building. They weren't taken from up close, but I could tell it was me. The way I dress, my hair, the bag I carry. I felt a chill run through me, and I kept flipping through the photos, my hands shaking now. They were all from the past week. I could tell because I recognized the outfits and the places. Someone had been following me, watching me, taking pictures without me knowing. I reached the last photo in the stack, and I nearly dropped it when I saw what it was. It was a picture of me, in my apartment, asleep in my bed. The angle was from the corner of the room, near the door. It was dark, but I could see myself clearly, curled up under the covers, completely unaware. I stared at that photo for what felt like forever, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it. How did someone get into my apartment? How did I not hear them? The thought that someone had been inside while I was asleep made my skin crawl. I jumped up from the table and checked my front door. It was locked, the deadbolt in place. I checked the windows, too, but they were all shut and locked as well. There was no sign of a break-in, nothing out of place. It didn't make any sense. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold it. They sent an officer over, and I showed him the pictures. He looked concerned, but there wasn't much he could do. He took the photos as evidence and said they'd investigate, but he didn't seem hopeful. He told me to keep my doors locked and be careful. After he left, I sat on the couch, staring at the spot where the box had been. I couldn't stop thinking about that last picture, the one of me sleeping. I felt sick to my stomach, knowing someone had been that close to me without me even knowing. The next few nights were the worst. I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept checking the doors and windows, making sure they were locked. But I never felt safe. I kept imagining someone standing over me while I slept, watching, waiting. I started noticing things, too. Little things that seemed off. A shadow moving outside my window, a creak in the hallway, the feeling of being watched when I walked to my car. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but it didn't help. One night, I woke up to a sound in my apartment. It was soft, just a faint creak, like someone stepping on the floor. My heart was pounding, and I lay there, frozen, too scared to move. I listened, but the sound didn't come again. I told myself it was nothing, but I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I checked the apartment again, every inch of it, but there was nothing out of place. I tried to convince myself it was just my nerves, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A few days later, I came home from work and found another package at my door. This one was smaller, but it filled me with dread the moment I saw it. I didn't want to open it, didn't want to see what was inside, but I had to know. I brought it inside, sat at the table, and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single photo, just one. It was a picture of my bed, taken from the same angle as before, but this time it was empty. Just the bed, neatly made, like it was waiting for someone to get in. I stared at it, my mind racing. There was no date, no time, nothing to tell me when it was taken. It could have been from that morning, or from weeks ago. But it felt like a message, like whoever was doing this was telling me they could come back any time. That they were watching, waiting. I called the police again, and they sent someone over, but it was the same as before. They took the photo, asked me some questions, but there was nothing they could do. No fingerprints, no clues, nothing to lead them to whoever was doing this. I started staying with a friend after that. I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore, couldn't stand the thought of being there alone. I didn't feel safe, didn't feel like I could ever feel safe again. The police never found out who it was, and the packages stopped after that. But I still think about it all the time, still wonder who it was and what they wanted. I moved to a new place, a different part of the city, but I still check the doors and windows every night, still feel like someone could be watching. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. I rented the cabin because I needed peace. The city was too loud, too busy, and I couldn't focus on the book I was supposed to finish. The cabin was remote, out in the mountains of Colorado, with no neighbors for miles. It seemed perfect. The drive up was long, winding through dense woods, and by the time I arrived, it was already getting dark. The cabin was small but cozy. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom, and a living room with a fireplace. The front door was old, made of heavy wood, and creaked loudly whenever it opened. I liked that at first. It felt like a place where I could really get some work done, or I wouldn't be disturbed. The first few days were peaceful. I spent my mornings writing, the afternoons walking through the woods, and the evenings reading by the fire. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts, and I was finally making progress on my book. But then, one night, something happened that I still can't fully explain. It was late, probably around midnight, and I was sitting in the living room, typing away on my laptop. The only light came from the fire, which was burning low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. That's when I heard it, the door creaking open. It was loud, unmistakable, and I froze. I hadn't heard anyone approach, and there was no reason for the door to open on its own. My first thought was that maybe I hadn't closed it all the way, but I was sure I had. The sound of that creak made my skin crawl. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding, and walked over to the door. It was open, just a few inches, enough to let in a draft of cold air. I pushed it the rest of the way open and stepped outside, looking around. There was nothing. The night was still, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. But when I looked down, I saw something that made my stomach drop, muddy footprints on the porch, leading inside. They were fresh, wet, and they weren't mine. I quickly backed into the cabin and shut the door, locking it this time. My mind was racing. Someone had been here, had walked right up to the door and opened it. But there was no one outside, no sign of anyone in the woods. I grabbed a fire poker from the hearth and started searching the cabin, room by room. I checked the bedroom, the bathroom, even the tiny closet, but there was no one there. The only thing I found were the muddy footprints, leading from the front door, across the living room, and stopping in the middle of the floor. They didn't lead anywhere else, didn't go back out the door. It didn't make sense. It was like whoever had come and had just vanished. I stood there in the middle of the living room, holding the poker, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what to do. There was no cell service out here, no way to call for help. I finally decided to stoke the fire, make it burn brighter, and sat down with my back to the wall, facing the door. I wasn't going to sleep that night, not after what I'd just seen. I sat there for hours, the poker clutched in my hand, my eyes darting around the room. Nothing else happened that night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When morning finally came, I was exhausted, but I forced myself to go outside and check around the cabin. The footprints were still there, clear as day, but they didn't lead away from the cabin. They just stopped at the door. I packed my things that morning. I didn't care about finishing the book anymore. I just wanted to get out of there. As I loaded my car, I kept looking around, expecting to see someone watching me from the trees, but there was no one. Just that awful, eerie silence. The drive back down the mountain was tense. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone in the back seat, but the car was empty. It wasn't until I was back in the city, surrounded by the noise and the people, that I started to feel safe again. I never figured out who or what opened that door, or how those footprints got there. I told a few people about it, but no one believed me. They said it was probably just my imagination, that I was tired or stressed. But I know what I saw. I haven't been back to the mountains since. I went to the laundromat around midnight. I hadn't planned on it, but I had this last load of clothes that needed washing, and the day had gotten away from me. The 24-hour laundromat wasn't far from my apartment, just a few blocks, so I figured I'd knock it out quickly. It was a small place, one of those old, dingy ones with flickering fluorescent lights and cracked linoleum floors. When I walked in, the place was almost empty, except for this guy sitting in the corner. I noticed him right away. He was just sitting there, staring at me. I tried to ignore him, thinking maybe he was just waiting for his laundry. I picked a washer as far from him as possible and loaded my clothes in. The whole time, I could feel his eyes on me. I started the machine and sat down on one of the plastic chairs. It was silent in there, except for the hum of the washers and the occasional drip from the ceiling. I pulled out my phone to distract myself, but I couldn't focus. Every time I glanced up, I saw him. He hadn't moved, but he was still staring, his eyes fixed on me. I kept telling myself that it was nothing, that he was just some guy, maybe a little weird, but harmless. I tried to go back to my phone, but my fingers were shaking. I looked up again, and that's when I noticed he wasn't in the corner anymore. He had moved. He was a few chairs closer now, sitting there, staring at me like before, only closer. I didn't even hear him move. My heart started to race. I told myself to stay calm, that maybe I was just imagining it, that maybe he had been there the whole time, but I knew that wasn't true. I could feel him watching me, and it made my skin crawl. I checked the time on my phone. My laundry still had another 20 minutes to go. I thought about just leaving, but I didn't want to leave my clothes behind, and I didn't want to walk out and have him follow me. So, I stayed put, but I kept my eyes on him. He didn't move again, but I could see him out of the corner of my eye, sitting there, closer now, his face in shadow. A few more minutes passed, and I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and walked over to the washer, pretending to check on my clothes, but really just wanting to get away from him. When I turned back around, he was standing up. He had moved again, and now he was even closer. I felt trapped. I tried to stay calm, to think rationally. I figured maybe he was just some homeless guy, looking for a place to stay out of the rain. Maybe he was just lonely. But the way he was watching me, it felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was waiting for something. I decided I wasn't going to wait around to find out what. I walked towards the door, trying to act casual, like I wasn't scared, but my heart was pounding in my chest. When I got to the door, I grabbed the handle and pulled, but it didn't move. It was locked. I tried again, harder this time, but the door wouldn't budge. I felt panic rising in my throat. I turned around, and he was standing right there, just a few feet away, closer than before. I hadn't even heard him move. He didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me with those dark eyes. I backed away, my hand still on the door handle, pulling and pulling, but it wouldn't open. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how the door had gotten locked, how I was going to get out of there. I looked around, desperate for something, anything that could help me. There was a payphone on the wall, but it looked broken, and I didn't have any change anyway. The windows were barred, and there was no one outside. I was trapped. He took a step closer, and I could see his face now. It was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes were dark, too dark. He looked at me like he was waiting for something, like he was enjoying the fear in my eyes. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. I backed up against the door, pulling on the handle with all my strength, but it still wouldn't open. He took another step closer, and I could see the corner of his mouth curl up in a smile, like he knew he had me. I was about to give up, to start screaming for help, when I heard a click. The door handle turned in my hand, and the door swung open. I didn't think, I just ran. I pushed past him, my shoulder slamming into him as I bolted out the door and into the night. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I looked back, expecting to see him following me, but he wasn't there. The street was empty. I ran all the way home, not stopping until I was inside, the door locked behind me. I collapsed on the floor, shaking, trying to catch my breath. I didn't know what had just happened, didn't know how I had gotten out of there, but I knew I was safe, at least for now. I never went back to that laundromat. I don't know what was wrong with that man, why he was watching me, or how the door had locked. I was in Chicago for work and had to stay late at the office. By the time I finished, it was well past midnight, and I was too tired to take the train back to my hotel. I decided to order a rideshare instead. The streets were nearly empty, the rain coming down in sheets, making everything look blurry and distant. The app said my driver was 2 minutes away, and I waited under the awning, trying to stay dry. When the car pulled up, something felt off. The car was the right make and model, a black sedan, but it looked older, more worn down than I expected. The windows were tinted so dark that I couldn't see the driver until he rolled down the window. He was a man in his 40s, maybe early 50s, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He didn't say anything, just looked at me and nodded. I hesitated for a second, but it was late, and I was exhausted. I figured I was just being paranoid, so I got in the back seat and gave him a tired hi. He didn't respond, just pulled away from the curb without a word. The inside of the car smelled faintly of cigarettes, and the seats were cracked and worn. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the rain hitting the roof and the tires splashing through puddles. I glanced at my phone to check the route, but the screen showed that we were still on track. I relaxed a little, thinking maybe the guy was just not a talker. I tried to focus on the lights of the city passing by outside the window. About 10 minutes into the ride, I noticed we were taking a turn that wasn't on the route. I looked back at my phone, and sure enough, we were going off course. I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice steady, and asked, "Hey, I think you missed a turn back there. The map says we should have stayed on the main road." The driver didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. He just kept driving, turning down another dark, narrow street that I didn't recognize. My heart started to race. I repeated myself, louder this time, but still nothing. The rain was coming down harder now, and the streets were getting more deserted the further we went. I could feel the panic building in my chest. I checked the app again, trying to cancel the ride or call for help, but it just kept saying recalculating route. My hands were shaking as I tried to get a hold of myself. I told him again, this time practically yelling, "You need to turn around. This isn't the right way." He didn't even flinch. His eyes stayed locked on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. I noticed then how fast we were going, way too fast for the narrow streets. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a mistake. He was taking me somewhere, and I had no idea where or why. I tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The child lock was on. My mind was racing, trying to think of what to do. I could see the buildings getting sparser, the streets getting darker. We were leaving the city, heading into some industrial area with warehouses and empty lots. My breath was coming in short gasps, and I could barely keep my hands steady as I tried to think. "Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "Just let me out. I won't tell anyone. I just want to go home." But he didn't answer, didn't even glance back at me. I felt completely helpless, trapped in the back seat of this car with a man who seemed intent on taking me somewhere I didn't want to go. I thought about trying to grab the wheel, but the divider between the front and back was too high, and the car was moving too fast. My only option seemed to be to wait for the car to slow down and make a run for it, but the way he was driving, I wasn't sure I'd get the chance. We turned onto a long, empty road, lined with tall, rusted fences and overgrown weeds. There were no streetlights, just the headlights of the car cutting through the darkness. My phone was useless, the map frozen, no signal in this part of the city. I felt like I was about to break down. Suddenly, the car started to slow. My heart leapt into my throat. This was my chance. I didn't know where we were or what was about to happen, but I knew I had to get out. The car came to a stop in front of a tall chain-link gate, and I saw him reach for something under his seat. Without thinking, I lunged forward, kicking at the window with all my strength. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. I kept kicking, panic giving me strength I didn't know I had. He turned around then, his eyes cold and furious, but I didn't stop. I kicked again and again until the glass finally gave way, shards flying everywhere. I scrambled through the broken window, cutting my arms and legs on the glass, and hit the ground hard. I didn't look back, didn't think, just ran. I could hear him shouting, the car door slamming, but I didn't stop. I sprinted down the road, the rain soaking through my clothes, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. The road seemed to stretch on forever, but eventually, I saw lights in the distance. I kept running, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I reached a gas station at the end of the road. I burst through the door, bloodied and soaking wet, and collapsed in front of the startled clerk. I don't remember much after that, just the feeling of relief when I knew I was safe. The police came, but by the time they got to the area, the car was gone. They never found the driver, never figured out who he was or why he did what he did. I was driving through New Mexico late one night, trying to make it to the next town before crashing at a cheap motel. The rain had started coming down hard, and my eyelids were getting heavy. When I saw the neon sign for a diner up ahead, I decided to pull over. I figured some coffee and maybe a bite to eat would help me get through the last leg of the trip. The place was called Sally's Diner, and it looked like something straight out of the 60s. The parking lot was empty except for one beat-up truck parked around the side. The rain was coming down in sheets, so I made a run for the door. Inside, it was warm, the kind of place that smelled like old coffee and fried food. The lights buzzed a little, casting a yellow glow over the checkered floor. There were a few booths lined up along the windows and a counter with stools in front of it. A couple of waitresses stood behind the counter, chatting with the cook, a heavy-set man with a stained apron. When I walked in, their conversation stopped, and they all turned to look at me. I forced a smile and sat at the counter, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. One of the waitresses, a woman in her 40s with dyed blonde hair and too much makeup, came over with a menu. Her smile was wide, but her eyes seemed off, like they were looking right through me. "What can I get you, hon?" she asked, her voice too sweet, like she was trying too hard. "Just coffee, please," I said, handing the menu back without even looking at it. I didn't plan on staying long, just enough to wake up a bit. She nodded and poured me a cup from the pot sitting on the warmer. As she did, I noticed the cook and the other waitress whispering to each other, glancing my way. It wasn't subtle, and it made me shift in my seat, feeling like an outsider in a place where I wasn't supposed to be. I sipped the coffee, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that was growing stronger with every passing minute. The coffee was lukewarm and bitter, but I forced it down, hoping it would help clear my head. I kept my eyes on the cup, avoiding the gaze of the people behind the counter. The rain pounded against the windows, making the diner feel even more isolated, like it was cut off from the rest of the world. After a few minutes, I decided I'd had enough. The coffee wasn't doing much for me, and the weird vibe in the diner was getting to me. I pulled a couple of bills from my wallet and left them on the counter. "Thanks," I said, sliding off the stool. "Leaving already?" the blonde waitress asked, her smile faltering just a bit. The question hung in the air, a little too forceful for my liking. "Yeah, I've got to get going," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I headed for the door, but before I could reach it, the other waitress, a younger woman with dark hair tied back in a ponytail, stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "You sure you don't want to stay a little longer?" "We've got pie," she said, her tone friendly but with an edge that made my skin crawl. I forced a laugh, trying to play it off. "No, thanks. I've really got to hit the road." The cook, who had been quiet up until now, suddenly spoke up from behind the counter. "You're not from around here, are you?" His voice was deep and slow, and there was something in the way he said it that made it feel less like a question and more like an observation. I shook my head, my hand already on the door handle. "Just passing through," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. But the way they were all looking at me, like I was some kind of specimen, made it hard to breathe. The blonde waitress took a step closer, her smile gone now, replaced with something that looked like concern, or maybe something else, something darker. "You should stay," she said softly, almost like a suggestion, but it didn't feel like one. "It's not safe out there tonight. Roads get slick in this rain." My heart was pounding in my chest. Something was very wrong here, but I didn't know what. All I knew was that I had to get out of that diner. "I'll be fine," I muttered, turning the handle and pushing the door open. The cool night air hit my face, and for a second, I felt a wave of relief. But as I stepped outside, I heard the blonde waitress call after me, her voice carrying through the rain. "Come back if you change your mind." I didn't look back. I ran to my car, fumbling with my keys as I unlocked the door and jumped inside. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the wipers struggling to keep up with the heavy rain. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The three of them were standing in the doorway, watching me drive away. The cook had his arms crossed over his chest, and the younger waitress was holding something in her hand, though I couldn't make out what it was. The blonde just stood there, smiling that same empty smile. I floored the gas pedal, wanting to put as much distance between me and that diner as possible. But even as I drove away, the unease didn't leave me. The roads were slick, just like they said, but I didn't care. I just needed to get to the next town, to somewhere with people, lights, anything but the dark, empty road stretching out in front of me. I tried to shake off the feeling that they had wanted something from me, that they were waiting for me to do something, but I couldn't. Every time I thought I was getting over it, their faces would flash in my mind, those smiles that didn't reach their eyes, those whispers that I couldn't quite hear but knew were about me. When I finally reached the next town, I pulled into the parking lot of a motel and sat there for a long time, just trying to calm down. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the neon sign for the motel flickered in the darkness. I should have felt safe, but I didn't. I kept looking around, expecting to see that old truck from the diner pull in behind me, but it never did. I checked into the motel and locked the door behind me, double-checking the windows to make sure they were secure. I didn't sleep much that night, just lay there with my eyes wide open, listening to the sound of the rain tapping against the window. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear something, a creak, a rustle, something outside, and my eyes would snap open, my heart racing. By morning, I was exhausted, but I packed up and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. It just seemed too strange, too hard to explain. But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I had stayed even a moment longer, something bad would have happened. Something I couldn't get away from. I've driven through that part of New Mexico a few times since then, but I've never stopped at another diner, not late at night, not in a small town. I keep thinking about that place, about what they wanted, about why they were so insistent that I stay. And I wonder, sometimes, if anyone else has stopped there since. And if they did, if they were as lucky as I was to get away. It was around midnight when I first heard the knocking. I was half asleep on the couch, the TV on but muted, when it came a frantic, rapid pounding at my door. I sat up, startled, trying to shake off the grogginess. It took a second for me to register that the knocking was real, not just something from a dream. I hesitated for a moment before getting up. I wasn't expecting anyone, and it wasn't normal for anyone to visit this late. I live in a pretty quiet building in New York, where people usually keep to themselves. The knocking continued, growing more urgent, so I walked over to the door and peeked through the peephole. It was my neighbor, Claire. She was standing there in her pajamas, her hair a mess, looking terrified. I could see her glancing over her shoulder, eyes wide. I opened the door just a crack, enough to hear her clearly. "Claire? What's going on?" I asked, my voice rough from sleep. "Please," she said, almost whispering, her voice shaking. "Let me in. I think someone's in my apartment." I opened the door fully, and she rushed inside, glancing nervously back into the hallway before I closed it behind her. My heart was starting to pound, but I tried to stay calm. "What do you mean? Did you see someone?" I asked, locking the door. She shook her head, pacing back and forth in my small living room. "I heard them. Footsteps. The door creaked open, and I could hear them moving around. But when I looked, there was no one there. I'm scared." I didn't know what to say. This didn't make any sense. Claire was always pretty level-headed, not the type to panic easily. I walked over to the window that overlooked the street, pulling back the curtain slightly to see if anything seemed out of place. The street below was empty, just a few parked cars and the occasional distant sound of the city that never really sleeps. "Are you sure you weren't just hearing things?" I asked, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just the building settling, or something outside. "No, it wasn't that," she insisted, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "It was inside. I heard it clearly, right there in the apartment. Please, can you check?" I didn't want to, but I could see she was genuinely scared. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer, the closest thing I had to a weapon, and headed for the door. "Stay here," I told her, trying to sound braver than I felt. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed that her apartment door was slightly open, just like she said. It was dark inside, the only light coming from the streetlights outside filtering through the windows. I took a deep breath and approached her door, my heart hammering in my chest. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. I stood in the doorway, shining the flashlight inside. Her apartment looked normal, nothing seemed out of place. But then, just as I was about to step inside, I saw it. A shadow moved across the wall, quick and silent. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. It was just a glimpse, but it was enough. Someone was in there. I pulled back, not daring to go any further. My mind raced. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't just leave her apartment open like that with someone inside. But going in there seemed like a terrible idea. Before I could make a decision, I heard a faint creak behind me. I turned around, my blood running cold. The door to my own apartment, the one I had just come through, was now slightly ajar. I had locked it, hadn't I? Fear gripped me as I realized what this meant. Whoever was in Claire's apartment had somehow gotten into mine while I was distracted. I backed away from both doors, my hands shaking as I gripped the flashlight tighter. I wanted to call out to Claire, to warn her, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how this was happening. How had someone moved so quickly, so quietly? And why? I slowly approached my apartment door, peering through the crack. The living room was dark, the only light coming from the TV's faint glow. I couldn't see anyone, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I took a step inside, my body tense, ready to swing the flashlight if needed. The apartment was eerily quiet, too quiet. I moved slowly, checking every corner, every shadow. But there was no one. It was as if whoever or whatever had been there had vanished. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way back to the living room, where Claire was supposed to be. But when I turned the corner, my blood turned to ice. The room was empty. Claire was gone. Panic surged through me as I frantically searched the apartment. The door was still ajar, and the windows were locked from the inside. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that anyone had left. It was like she had just disappeared. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to make sense of what was happening. I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in on me. The sense of dread was suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being toyed with. Then, I heard a faint whisper, so close it felt like it was right next to my ear. I spun around, swinging the flashlight wildly, but there was nothing there. My skin crawled, and I backed away, desperate to get out, to escape whatever was happening. I bolted for the door, not caring about the noise anymore. I had to get out of that apartment. As I reached for the handle, the whisper came again, this time from the direction of Claire's apartment. It was clearer now, and I realized it wasn't a whisper, it was her voice, soft and pleading. "Help me," she said, her voice so quiet, so desperate. I hesitated, torn between the instinct to flee and the need to help her. But the fear was too much. I couldn't do it. I couldn't go back in there. I yanked the door open and ran into the hallway, not stopping until I was outside, under the streetlights, gasping for breath. I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I called the police from a nearby payphone, but when they arrived, there was no trace of Claire, no sign that anyone had been in my apartment. They searched both places, found nothing out of the ordinary, and chalked it up to a misunderstanding or a prank. But I knew it wasn't. I knew what I saw, what I heard. Claire never came back. Her apartment was cleared out a few days later, her belongings gone as if she had never lived there. I moved out shortly after that, unable to shake the feeling that whatever happened that night wasn't over. I still don't know where Claire went or who or what was in those apartments with us. I decided to take a walk on the beach that night because I couldn't sleep. The air was warm, and the waves were gentle, just a quiet rhythm that I found comforting. The beach was empty, which I liked. It felt like I had the whole place to myself. I wasn't sure how long I had been walking, just letting my thoughts drift, when I noticed him. At first, he was just a shadow, far off down the shoreline. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just another person out for a late-night stroll. But something about the way he was walking, steady and slow, made me uneasy. I kept going, trying to ignore him, but every time I glanced back, he was still there. He wasn't getting any closer, but he wasn't falling behind either. It felt like he was keeping pace with me. I told myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. It's a public beach, after all. But the feeling in my stomach was growing, that tight, anxious knot that tells you something's wrong. I sped up a little, just to see what would happen. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But when I looked back again, my heart dropped. He had sped up too. The gap between us hadn't changed, like he was matching my pace perfectly. It was too deliberate to be an accident. I thought about turning around, walking past him to get back to the parking lot, but something about that felt wrong. I didn't want to get any closer to him. The idea of passing him in the dark made my skin crawl. So I kept moving forward, hoping that maybe he would just turn back or leave me alone if I got far enough ahead. But he didn't. I could feel the panic rising in me now, my heart beating faster with every step. I glanced back again, and he was closer. Not by much, but enough that I knew he was gaining on me. I started walking faster, almost jogging now, the sand slipping under my feet, making it harder to move. He was getting closer. I could hear his footsteps now, heavy and deliberate. The beach was still empty, no one around, just the dark water on one side and the dunes on the other. I had nowhere to go. I thought about running, but the sand would slow me down, and I didn't know if I could outrun him. And what if I tripped or fell? The thought made my throat tighten with fear. I tried to stay calm, to think of a plan, but my mind was racing. Why was he following me? What did he want? I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in on me, even though I was out in the open. I kept moving, my pace quickening with every step, but it didn't matter. He was still there, still following, closer and closer. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped and spun around to face him, my heart hammering in my chest. I expected him to stop too, maybe say something, explain himself. But he didn't. He just kept coming, his face hidden in the shadows, his steps slow and steady, like he had all the time in the world. I realized then how close he was, much closer than I thought. I could see his outline clearly now, tall and broad-shouldered. He wasn't hurrying, just moving toward me with that same deliberate pace, like he knew I had nowhere to go. "Who are you? What do you want?" I shouted, my voice shaking, but he didn't answer. He just kept walking, closing the distance between us. The fear was overwhelming now, choking me, making it hard to breathe. I took a step back, then another, but it didn't matter. He was almost on top of me. I turned and ran, my legs pumping as fast as they could in the soft sand. I could hear him behind me, the steady thud of his footsteps getting louder, closer. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the beach stretching out in front of me like it would never end. The parking lot was still far away, too far. I could see the lights in the distance, but they felt miles away. My lungs were burning, my legs aching, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let him catch me. The fear was driving me forward, pushing me beyond what I thought I could do. But he was faster. I could hear him gaining on me, those heavy footsteps getting louder, closer. I didn't know what to do, where to go. There was no one around, no one to help. It was just me and him, alone on that dark, empty beach. I saw the dunes ahead and veered toward them, hoping to lose him in the tall grass, to find a place to hide. But as soon as I left the open sand, I stumbled, my foot catching on something, and I went down hard, the breath knocked out of me. I scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. He was right there, looming over me, his shadow swallowing me up. I could barely see his face, just a dark shape against the night sky, but I could feel the danger, the threat radiating off him. Please, I gasped, backing away on my hands and knees, but he didn't stop. He reached down, grabbing my arm with a grip like iron, and I screamed, a raw, desperate sound that echoed off the water. I struggled, kicking and thrashing, but he was too strong. He hauled me to my feet, his face still hidden in the shadows. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, his other hand clamping over my mouth, cutting off my screams. I was trapped, caught in his hold, unable to move, to breathe. The panic was overwhelming, drowning me. I thought it was the end, that he was going to kill me right there, on that dark, deserted beach. But then, something changed. A noise, faint but growing louder, the sound of an engine, of tires on gravel. Headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the night. A car was coming down the beach access road, heading toward the parking lot. He froze, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench free. I stumbled back, gasping for air, and he turned, looking toward the approaching car. I didn't wait to see what he would do. I turned and ran, my legs shaking, my whole body trembling with fear and exhaustion. I ran toward the lights, toward the car that was now pulling into the parking lot. I waved my arms, screaming for help, and the car stopped, the driver's door opening. It was an older man, a local, I guessed, his face creased with concern as he saw me running toward him. He didn't ask any questions, just helped me into the car, his eyes scanning the darkness behind me. I looked back, expecting to see the man still chasing me, but he was gone. The beach was empty, just the quiet waves and the distant sound of traffic. The man drove me to the nearest police station, where I told them everything. They went back to the beach, searched the area, but they didn't find anything. No sign of a man, no footprints in the sand. It was like he had never been there. But I knew he had. I could still feel the bruises on my arm, the fear still tight in my chest. I left Florida the next day, cutting my trip short, and I haven't been back since. I had always lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where nothing much happens. Everyone kept to themselves, and the only time I ever really talked to the neighbors was in passing, maybe a wave here and there. There was this one lady who lived 2 doors down from me. Her name was Mrs. Davis. She was older, maybe in her late 60s, and she kept to herself even more than the rest of us. I never saw her with visitors, and the only time she left her house was to get groceries or the mail. Even then, it was like she was trying to be invisible. I hadn't seen her in weeks. I didn't think much of it at first. It's not like we were friends or anything, but after a while, it started to bother me. Her lawn hadn't been mowed, and the trash cans hadn't been put out. That wasn't like her. She was always neat and tidy, almost obsessive about it. One Saturday, I decided to check on her. It was around midday, and the sky was overcast. I walked over to her house and rang the doorbell. Nothing. I knocked, louder this time. Still nothing. That's when I noticed the door was slightly open. Just a crack, but enough to make me feel uneasy. I stood there for a minute, debating whether or not to go in. Something didn't feel right. I pushed the door open slowly and called out, "Mrs. Davis?" My voice sounded strange in the silence, like it didn't belong there. There was no answer. I stepped inside, just past the threshold, and looked around. The living room was neat, everything in its place, but there was this strange feeling in the air, like the house was holding its breath. I walked further in, my footsteps barely making a sound on the carpet. "Mrs. Davis?" I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. I started to turn back when I noticed something on the floor near the hallway, a small spot of blood. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't much, just a drop, but it was enough to make my stomach turn. I followed the hallway down to the kitchen. The door was open, and the light was on, but no one was there. The kitchen was spotless, except for a broken plate on the floor. It looked like someone had dropped it in a hurry. I bent down to pick up the pieces when I heard the faintest creak of a door somewhere behind me. I froze, my hand hovering over the broken plate. I hadn't seen anyone else in the house, but I suddenly had the feeling I wasn't alone. I stood up slowly, turning around to face the hallway. The house was silent again, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I backed out of the kitchen and headed for the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the living room, I heard it again, a creak, louder this time, like a door being pushed open. It was coming from down the hallway, near the back of the house. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to leave, but something pulled me back. I don't know if it was curiosity or something else, but I couldn't just walk away. I made my way down the hallway, my hands shaking. The sound had come from the bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and a sliver of light spilled out into the hallway. I stood outside the door, my heart in my throat, and pushed it open just a little more. The bedroom was empty, but the window was open, the curtain blowing gently in the breeze. The bed was unmade, and the sheets were tangled like someone had gotten up in a hurry. I noticed more spots of blood on the floor, leading to the closet door, which was closed. I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't prepared for what I found when I opened that closet. Inside, crumpled on the floor, was Mrs. Davis's cat. It wasn't moving, and there was a dark stain on the carpet beneath it. I backed away, the smell of blood hitting me like a wave. The cat had been dead for a while. I turned to leave, my skin crawling, but before I could take a step, I heard the floor creak behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The room was empty, but the door to the hallway was now closed. I didn't remember closing it. My heart was racing, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I reached for the door, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. It took me a second to realize the door was locked. I jiggled the handle, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. Panic started to set in, and I pounded on the door, shouting for help. But the house remained silent. I don't know how long I stood there, trying to get the door open, but eventually, it swung open on its own, the force almost knocking me off my feet. I stumbled out into the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. The house felt different now, like it was alive, watching me. I needed to get out. I ran down the hallway, my breath coming in short gasps. When I reached the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. The front door, the one I had left open, was now closed. And standing in front of it was Mrs. Davis. She was just standing there, her back to me, her shoulders hunched like she was listening for something. My first thought was relief, she was alive, after all. But then she turned around, and I realized something was very wrong. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were wide, staring at something I couldn't see. There was blood on her hands, dried and dark, and her clothes were torn. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me, like she didn't even know where she was. I tried to speak, to ask her what had happened, but the words caught in my throat. She took a step toward me, and I instinctively backed away. That's when I saw the knife in her hand. It was small, but the blade was covered in blood. I didn't wait to find out what she was going to do. I turned and ran, heading for the back door. I could hear her footsteps behind me, quick and unsteady. I reached the kitchen and flung open the back door, stumbling out into the yard. I didn't stop running until I reached my house. I locked the door behind me and called the police. They arrived within minutes, but by the time they got to Mrs. Davis's house, she was gone. They searched the house and the surrounding area but didn't find her. The only evidence she had ever been there was the blood and the broken plate in the kitchen. They questioned me for hours, but there wasn't much I could tell them. I didn't know where she had gone or why she had been acting like that. All I knew was that something terrible had happened in that house, and I had been lucky to get out. I haven't seen Mrs. Davis since that day. Her house remains empty, the windows dark and the lawn overgrown. It was late, way too late to be driving on an empty highway in the middle of nowhere, but I needed to keep going. The desert stretched out on both sides, nothing but darkness, and the only thing breaking it up was the narrow beam of my headlights. The gas gauge had been inching toward empty for a while, and I knew I had to find a station soon, or I'd be stranded. I kept driving, hoping I'd spot a sign or something, but it was just more road, more darkness. The needle was dangerously low when I finally saw it, a flicker of light up ahead. As I got closer, I could make out an old gas station, the kind you don't really see anymore. The sign was faded, and the lights over the pumps were flickering, but it was something. I pulled in, relieved I wasn't going to be stuck out there. The place looked abandoned. There were no other cars, no sign of anyone around. The building itself was dark, no lights on inside, and the windows were dusty and cracked. I almost thought about leaving, but the pump looked like it might still work, and I didn't have a choice. I got out of the car, the sound of gravel crunching under my feet breaking the eerie silence. The pump was old, the kind you have to crank to get started. I grabbed the nozzle and started filling up. The gas flowed, and I felt a little better, like maybe everything was going to be okay. But then I looked up at the building. Something moved inside. It was just a flicker, a shadow passing by the window. I froze, staring at the darkened glass. My mind raced, trying to figure out what I'd seen. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe there was someone in there. But if there was, why hadn't they come out when I pulled in? I kept my eyes on the building, feeling my heart start to pound in my chest. The nozzle clicked, signaling the tank was full, but I didn't move. My hand was shaking, and I didn't want to turn my back on that building. I forced myself to put the nozzle back and screw on the gas cap, but I couldn't stop looking at the window. That's when I saw it again, the movement inside. This time, it was clearer, a figure shifting in the darkness. It wasn't my imagination. Someone was in there, and they were watching me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I needed to get out of there, but I couldn't stop staring at the building. The figure moved again, closer to the window, but I still couldn't make out any details. It was just a shadow, a dark shape that seemed to be getting closer. I backed up toward my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I kept my eyes on the window, but the figure had stopped moving. It was just standing there, watching. My mind was screaming at me to get in the car, to drive away as fast as I could, but I felt like I was glued to the spot. Finally, I snapped out of it. I jumped into the car and slammed the door, my hands fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into gear, peeling out of the station without looking back. My heart was racing, and I couldn't get the image of that shadowy figure out of my head. I drove for miles, not daring to slow down, not until the gas station was far behind me. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that whoever was in that building had seen me, and maybe, just maybe, they were following me. It wasn't until I reached the next town, lights and people all around me, that I started to feel safe again. I pulled into a well-lit parking lot and just sat there, trying to calm down. I told myself it was nothing, just some creepy old building with a caretaker or something, but I couldn't convince myself. There was something wrong with that place, something I couldn't explain. I was hiking through the woods last week. I'd taken a shortcut through the forest trail to get home faster. It was supposed to be a quick walk, just cutting through the woods instead of taking the main road. I had done it plenty of times before, but this time felt different. The weather had been perfect all day, but as I entered the trail, it started to drizzle lightly. The forest was quiet, with only the sound of raindrops hitting the leaves. I was enjoying the solitude when I began to hear something behind me. At first, I thought it was just the sound of my own footsteps, but then I realized it was more rhythmic, more deliberate. I glanced over my shoulder, but the trail was empty. I shook it off and kept walking, thinking it was just my imagination. But the footsteps continued, getting louder as I walked. I quickened my pace, and so did the footsteps. They were matching my speed, step for step. It felt like someone was walking right behind me, just out of sight. The more I tried to convince myself it was nothing, the more unnerving it became. I began to walk faster, almost breaking into a jog. The footsteps accelerated with me. It was like they were in sync with every movement I made. My heart started pounding. I knew I should have turned around and confronted whoever was behind me, but I was too scared to look. The forest seemed to close in around me. The trees were dense, and the path was muddy, making it hard to see anything clearly. In a panic, I started running, hoping to outpace whoever was following me. The footsteps grew louder and quicker. I could hear them clearly now, right behind me, and it felt like they were getting closer. I could almost hear breathing, but when I looked back, there was no one there. The trail was unfamiliar. I had taken this shortcut many times before, but now it felt like I was being guided somewhere I didn't know. The path ahead seemed to shift and twist, and I found myself veering off into a part of the forest I didn't recognize. It was darker here, with the trees so thick that it felt like night had fallen. I tried to stop and catch my breath, but the footsteps didn't stop. They seemed to be getting louder, more insistent. I could feel a rising sense of dread. I knew I had to get out of there, but I couldn't remember which way I had come from. The trail had split, and I had no idea which direction to take. In my panic, I took a turn that led me deeper into the forest. The more I ran, the more disoriented I became. I stumbled over roots and branches, the rain making the ground slippery. My clothes were soaked, and my breath was coming in ragged gasps. Then I saw it, a small, dimly lit cabin in the distance. It was strange to see a cabin in the middle of the woods, but I was too desperate to care. I headed toward it, hoping to find some sort of shelter or help. As I approached, the footsteps stopped. I could no longer hear them. The cabin looked old and abandoned, but I knocked on the door anyway, hoping someone was inside. There was no answer, and the door was locked tight. I backed away from the cabin and looked around. The forest seemed silent now, but I felt like I was being watched. The footsteps had stopped, but the fear didn't. I was still on edge, feeling like someone was waiting for me to make a wrong move. I decided to make my way back to the trail I had come from. It took me a while to retrace my steps, but eventually, I found the familiar path again. I didn't stop running until I reached the main road. I flagged down a passing car and begged the driver to take me home. The whole experience was surreal. I'm still not sure who or what was following me, but I haven't taken that shortcut since. I worked a late shift at the mall last week, and by the time I was done, it was past midnight. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few cars scattered around. I was tired and looking forward to going home. I walked to my car, parked a bit far from the entrance because it was all that was left. As I got closer, I noticed a van parked a few spaces away. It was an old, beat-up model with the engine running. The headlights were on, but no one was inside. I thought it was odd but didn't pay it much attention. I reached my car and unlocked it, feeling a little uneasy. The van's engine was making a low rumbling sound, and I could see the exhaust pipe puffing out a steady stream of smoke. I shrugged it off and got into my car, quickly closing the door behind me. As I was starting my car, I noticed the van's headlights shining in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then I saw the van slowly pull out of its spot and drive toward me. My heart began to race. The van stopped right beside my car, blocking me in. I felt a wave of panic. The driver's side door of the van opened, and a man stepped out. He was wearing a baseball cap and a dark hoodie, which made it hard to see his face. My hands were trembling as I reached for my phone to call for help, but I realized I had left it on the front seat of my car, just out of reach. The man approached my car slowly. I locked the doors immediately and looked around, hoping someone else might be around, but the lot was deserted. The man came closer, and I saw him peeking through the window. He wasn't trying to hide his presence. It was like he wanted me to know he was there. I tried to stay calm. I pressed the button to roll down the window slightly, just enough to talk. I asked him if I could help him with something. His voice was calm but had an edge to it. He asked if I was having trouble with my car and if I needed assistance. I said I was fine, trying to sound as firm as I could. The man didn't move away. He stood there, his face still hidden under the cap. I could see his shadow moving in the dim light. He started asking more personal questions, like where I was going and if I needed a ride. I was starting to get really scared. I told him I didn't need help and that I was calling the police. The man's demeanor changed instantly. He got a little more insistent, saying it was too late for me to be out alone and that he was just trying to help. I could see he was reaching into his pocket, and my fear spiked. I tried to start my car, but I was too shaken. The engine sputtered, and I panicked. The man seemed to sense my fear and took a step closer. I could see the outline of something in his hand, but I couldn't make out what it was. I knew I had to get out of there, but the van was still blocking me in. I took a deep breath and decided to try the car again. I cranked the engine, and this time it roared to life. I glanced back and saw that the man was now standing by the driver's side door of my car, trying to open it. My heart pounded as I put the car in reverse and slammed the gas pedal. The van's driver yelled something, but I didn't stop. I managed to back out of the space and swerved around the van, narrowly avoiding hitting it. I drove as fast as I could out of the parking lot, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was on a main road with more traffic. I pulled into a well-lit gas station and called the police. They came to the gas station and took my report. I waited there until they finished checking the area and told me it was safe to go home. I haven't been back to that mall since. I know it was probably just a guy looking for trouble, but it felt so real and frightening. Every time I think about it, I still feel that same wave of panic. I'm just glad I got away without anything happening. I was at the train station in Massachusetts, waiting for a late train. It was past midnight, and the station was mostly empty. I was just sitting on a bench, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional distant rumble of trains. A man approached me. He looked disheveled, like he hadn't slept in days. He wore a worn-out coat and had a wild look in his eyes. I noticed he was carrying a large, nondescript package under one arm. He stopped right in front of me and asked if I had a moment to talk. I figured he was just another late-night traveler, so I said sure. He introduced himself as Michael and said he was looking for someone to help him with a delivery. He offered me a large sum of money to take the package to an address he would give me. I was immediately on edge. It was late, I was alone, and the whole situation felt off. I declined politely, saying I wasn't interested. Michael's face twisted into a grimace, and he became noticeably more insistent. He kept saying that it was a simple job and that it would be a shame to turn down such easy money. I told him again that I wasn't interested and tried to walk away. But he followed me, his voice growing more urgent. He said that he really needed help and that I was his last hope. I started to feel trapped, and I noticed that other people in the station were starting to watch us. There were a few people scattered around, but now they were paying close attention to our conversation. I could feel their eyes on me, which made me even more uneasy. Michael's insistence only made things worse. His tone grew sharp, and he started saying that I didn't know what I was turning down. It was like he was trying to scare me into accepting. I tried to stay calm and reiterated that I wasn't going to help. I moved to another part of the station, hoping he would leave me alone. But Michael followed me, his pace quickening. He was no longer just asking, he was almost demanding. The atmosphere in the station felt like it was closing in on me. I could see that the people who were watching were not just bystanders, they were paying attention to every move I made. I felt like I was being surrounded. Michael's behavior was erratic, and I was starting to get seriously worried. I decided to call the police, hoping to get some help. I took out my phone and started dialing, but before I could finish, Michael noticed what I was doing. He grew more frantic and tried to grab my arm. I pulled away and moved towards the ticket counter, hoping to find some security or at least more people. Michael kept trying to follow me, but I could hear him muttering angrily. The other people in the station had started moving away, but the few who remained were still watching, like they were waiting for something to happen. When I reached the ticket counter, I told the clerk what was happening. The clerk looked concerned and immediately called for security. I saw a couple of security guards come into the station and walk over to where Michael was. Michael, seeing the security, started to back away. He was still yelling and waving the package around, but he eventually turned and fled out of the station. The security guards chased after him, and I was left standing there, my heart pounding. The police arrived soon after and took my statement. They said they would check the area for Michael and any other potential threats. They advised me to stay in a well-lit area until they could ensure everything was safe. I waited until the situation was cleared up, then finally boarded my train. The journey was nerve-wracking, and I kept glancing around, half expecting to see Michael or someone else who might have been involved. Thankfully, I arrived home without any more incidents. The whole experience was unsettling, and it took me a while to shake off the anxiety. I couldn't help but wonder about the people who were watching and whether they were connected to Michael. It was one of those nights that leaves you with more questions than answers, but I'm just glad I got out of it safely. I checked into a cheap motel in Arizona around midnight. The drive had been long, and I was exhausted. The place was isolated, with nothing but desert for miles. The clerk at the front desk barely spoke and seemed more interested in the TV behind him than in checking me in. My room was as expected, small, with peeling wallpaper and a musty smell. I tried to ignore it and focused on getting some sleep. After I got settled in, I could hear faint noises coming from the room next door. At first, I thought it was just the old building settling, but then it sounded like muffled shouting or maybe arguing. I tried to ignore it and went to bed, but the noises continued. They were getting louder and more frantic. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, put on a jacket, and stepped out into the cold desert air. I walked over to the room next door and saw that the door was slightly ajar. The noises had stopped, but I could still hear faint shuffling from inside. I knocked on the door, hoping to find out what was going on. There was no answer. I pushed the door open a bit more and peeked inside. The room was dimly lit by a flickering lamp on the nightstand. The bed was disheveled, and there was a stain on the carpet that looked like blood. My heart started to race. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone in there?" But there was no response. I took a cautious step inside. The room was a mess, furniture was overturned, and the air was thick with an unpleasant odor. I could see something moving in the shadows by the closet. I called 911 on my phone, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The operator answered quickly, and I explained the situation. I told her I was at the motel and that there was evidence of violence in the room next door. She said she would send an officer as soon as possible. While waiting, I tried to stay hidden. I noticed more signs of a struggle: broken furniture, torn curtains, and what looked like blood splatters on the walls. The shadows in the closet seemed to shift, and I could hear a faint, raspy breathing coming from there. I stayed as far from the closet as possible, trying not to make any noise. My hands were shaking as I kept an eye on the door. I didn't know if the person hiding in the closet was aware of me or if they were waiting for something. Every creak of the floorboards felt amplified, and every shadow seemed menacing. Finally, I heard the distant sound of sirens. Relief washed over me as I heard the police pull up outside. I saw their flashlights through the window and heard their footsteps approaching. They knocked on the door, announcing themselves, and I rushed over to let them in. The officers quickly entered the room and began searching the area. They found the person hiding in the closet, a man who looked disheveled and scared. They also found evidence that someone had been badly hurt in the room. The police took the man into custody and started an investigation into what had happened. I explained everything to the officers, how I had heard the noises and how I had found the door ajar. They took my statement and assured me that they would handle it from there. I felt a mix of relief and shock as they wrapped up their investigation. I went back to my own room and tried to settle down, but sleep was elusive. The noises I had heard and the sight of the room next door haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had almost happened. The next morning, I checked out of the motel and left the area as quickly as I could. I didn't want to stick around any longer. I had been feeling restless all day, so I decided to go for a hike to clear my mind. It was late, and the sky was darkening quickly, but I didn't care. The air was cool, and the trail near my house had always been a safe place for me. I'd walked it countless times, day and night. Something about the quiet woods always helped me think. So I grabbed my jacket, flashlight, and headed out. The trail was damp from the rain earlier, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. The trees loomed over me, their branches heavy with moisture, and the only sound was the squish of my boots on the soft ground. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. The stress of the day started to fade as I walked deeper into the forest. I'd been walking for about 20 minutes when I first heard them. Voices. At first, I thought it was just the wind or maybe some late-night hikers like me. But as I kept walking, they became clearer, distinct. There were two of them, a man and a woman, talking low, almost whispering. It was strange because this trail wasn't exactly popular at night, especially not on a weekday. I slowed my pace, trying to make out what they were saying. The trees were thick, and the voices echoed strangely, making it hard to pinpoint where they were coming from. I stopped, shining my flashlight around, but I couldn't see anyone. The voices seemed to be coming from further down the trail, so I kept walking, curious but cautious. As I got closer, the words started to make sense. At first, it was just bits and pieces, phrases here and there that didn't add up. Something about waiting and watching. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. It's easy to mishear things in the dark, in the middle of the woods. But then I heard my name. They said my name. Clear as day. My heart skipped a beat, and I stopped dead in my tracks. There was no mistaking it. They were talking about me. I crouched down behind a tree, trying to calm my breathing, trying to listen. They were close now, closer than I had realized. I turned off my flashlight, plunging myself into darkness, and strained to hear. The man spoke first. "She's alone," he said. His voice was rough, like he'd been smoking too long. "She always hikes this trail. Told you she'd come tonight." The woman laughed softly. "Easy. Too easy." I felt a chill run down my spine. They had been watching me. They knew I'd be here. Panic started to set in, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think. I needed to get out of there, but I couldn't just run back the way I came. They'd hear me, or worse, they'd see me. I tried to remember the trail. There was a fork a little ways ahead. If I could make it there without them noticing, I could take the side path that looped back to the parking lot. It was longer, but it was my best shot at getting out of there without running into them. I waited until I couldn't hear their voices anymore, then I slowly stood up and started moving. I kept off the main trail, walking as quietly as I could through the underbrush. Every snap of a twig underfoot made me wince, but I kept going. I didn't dare turn on my flashlight. The darkness was thick, but my eyes had adjusted enough to make out the faint outlines of the trees. I could still hear them, further up the trail now, but I couldn't make out what they were saying anymore. I just focused on putting distance between us. It felt like hours, but I finally reached the fork. I took the side path, praying they wouldn't decide to come this way. The trail was narrower here, less maintained. Branches scratched at my arms and legs as I pushed through the foliage. I was moving faster now, adrenaline pushing me forward, fear making every shadow seem like it was moving. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see them following me, but the trail behind me stayed empty. The voices were gone, but I could still hear them in my head, echoing, repeating those words. "She's alone." I was close to the parking lot when I heard a rustle behind me. I froze, turning slowly, but I couldn't see anything. The trees were thick here, the trail barely visible in the dark. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Just the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I forced myself to keep moving. The parking lot was just ahead, and once I reached it, I could get to my car and be gone. But every step felt like it took an eternity. Every sound made me jump. When I finally saw the lights of the parking lot, relief washed over me. I hurried to my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I got inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. I didn't look back as I drove away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching me. I didn't go back to that trail. Every time I think about it, I hear their voices. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't heard them, if I hadn't turned off my flashlight. They knew my name. They knew I'd be there. And they were waiting. I decided to rent a cabin in Alaska for a weekend. Needed a break from everything, you know? Work had been a lot, life had been a lot, so I figured a few days out in the wilderness would help clear my head. The place I found was perfect. Remote, surrounded by trees, and the snow made it all look so peaceful. It was just what I needed. The first day was uneventful. I spent most of it inside, just reading and enjoying the quiet. The only sound was the wind outside and the occasional creak of the cabin settling. It was nice. By the time night came, I felt more relaxed than I had in a long time. The silence out there was different, almost heavy, but it was a nice change from the city noise. When I woke up the next morning, I went outside to take a look around. The air was cold and sharp, the kind that wakes you up instantly. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were fresh, too. They started near the edge of the trees and came right up to the cabin door. At first, I thought it might have been an animal, but they were definitely human footprints. But I hadn't heard anyone, and there weren't any cars or roads nearby. I hadn't even seen another person since I arrived. I looked around, trying to see if anyone was out there, but there was nothing. Just the wind and the snow-covered trees. It was unsettling, but I told myself it was probably just a hiker passing by. Maybe they were curious about the cabin. I didn't think too much of it. Not then, at least. That night, though, things started to feel different. I had been lying in bed, drifting off, when I heard it. A tapping sound. Light, but distinct. It was coming from the window near the front door. I froze, listening. It wasn't a tree branch or the wind. It was too deliberate, too rhythmic. I got up, my heart pounding, and went to the window. The tapping stopped the moment I got close. I peered outside, but there was no one there. Just the dark shapes of the trees swaying in the wind and the thick blanket of snow on the ground. I stood there for a while, just staring out, waiting to see something, anything. But nothing happened. No more tapping. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. Every little sound kept waking me up. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching. The next day, I checked outside first thing. The footprints from yesterday were still there, but no new ones. Everything was undisturbed. It almost made me feel like I'd imagined the tapping, like it was all in my head. I spent the day trying to enjoy myself, but I couldn't relax. I kept looking out the windows, expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. By the time night fell, I was on edge. I tried reading again, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing over at the windows, waiting for that sound. And then it started again. The tapping. This time, It was on the window near the kitchen. Soft, persistent. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the window, but like before, it stopped as soon as I got close. I shined the light outside, sweeping it across the trees, but there was no one there. The snow was untouched, and the night was dead quiet. It was like whoever or whatever was out there was toying with me. I locked all the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. But that didn't help much. The tapping came back. It moved around the cabin, from window to window. First, near the living room, then by the bedroom. Always stopping just before I could catch it. I felt trapped, surrounded by something I couldn't see. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I would hear that damn tapping. It felt like it was getting closer, more insistent. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, that there was a logical explanation for it. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. On the third day, I decided I'd had enough. I was packing up to leave when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The footprints. The ones from 2 days ago. They hadn't melted or been covered by new snow. They were still there, as fresh as the day I first saw them. It didn't make sense. The snow should have covered them by now, or at least softened the edges, but they looked untouched, like they'd just been made. That night, the tapping was different. It was louder, more forceful, almost like a knock. And this time, it wasn't just outside. I heard it from inside the cabin, too. At first, it was faint, coming from the far side of the room. Then it got closer. It felt like it was right behind me, tapping on the walls, the floor, the windows. I grabbed the flashlight again, moving from room to room, but I couldn't find anything. The tapping followed me, like it was always just one step ahead, just out of reach. It was driving me crazy. I felt like I was being hunted, played with. Then, as I was standing in the middle of the living room, trying to figure out what to do, the tapping stopped. The silence was sudden, jarring. I stood there, waiting, but all I could hear was my own breathing. I thought, maybe, it was over. Maybe whoever or whatever had finally left. But then I heard it. A slow creak, like someone stepping on a loose floorboard. It came from the bedroom. My heart skipped a beat. I knew I hadn't left the bedroom door open, but I could see it now, slightly ajar, just enough to make out the darkness inside. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The creaking continued, deliberate, like someone was pacing back and forth. Then it stopped, and there was silence again. That was almost worse, than not knowing where they were or what they were doing. I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the door. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a wall, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that cabin, from whatever was inside it. As I drove away, I looked back once. The cabin was dark, the windows reflecting the moonlight off the snow. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the doorway, just a shadow against the light, watching me leave. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, hours later. I stayed late at the office that night. It wasn't the first time, but something about that night felt different. The building was quieter than usual, almost like it was holding its breath. Everyone else had gone home hours ago, and I was alone, finishing up a report that was due the next morning. The clock on my computer read 10:47 p.m. The rain outside tapped against the windows, and the hum of the fluorescent lights was the only thing breaking the silence. I was trying to focus, but I kept getting distracted by the silence. It was too quiet. You know how sometimes silence can be loud? It was like that. At one point, I thought I heard something, a soft sound, like footsteps in the hallway. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the building settling or maybe the wind. But then I heard it again, a little louder this time. Slow, deliberate footsteps, getting closer. I paused and listened, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The footsteps stopped right outside my office door. My heart started to race. I stared at the door, waiting, but nothing happened. No knock, no voice. Just silence. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe just a janitor or someone from another office grabbing something they'd forgotten. But as I sat there, staring at the door, I noticed something, shadows moving under the door. Someone was standing there. Not moving, just standing. I could see the faint outline of feet, the way the light from the hallway shifted slightly as they shifted their weight. I felt my stomach drop. I got up slowly from my chair, trying not to make any noise. My office was on the far side of the building, tucked away at the end of a long hallway. The nearest exit was on the opposite side, through the main lobby. I glanced at the security monitor on my desk. The office had cameras in the hallways and the lobby, all feeding into the small screen. I clicked through the feeds, my hand shaking. When I got to the hallway outside my office, I froze. There was someone there, just outside my door. They were facing the wall, standing still. I couldn't see their face, but they were tall, wearing dark clothes. My first instinct was to call security, but then I remembered the building's security guard left at 10 p.m. sharp every night. There was no one else in the building. Just me. And whoever this was. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they didn't realize anyone was still here. But then, as I watched the screen, they turned. Slowly, like they knew I was watching. I saw their face. It wasn't anyone I recognized, just a man with dark eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. He stared at the door, my door, like he knew I was behind it. And then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold, almost cruel, like he was enjoying this. He took a step closer to the door, and I felt my heart jump. I backed away from the monitor, my mind racing. What was he doing here? What did he want? I didn't have any answers, just a sinking feeling in my gut that told me I needed to get out of there. I moved quietly to the door, trying to listen for any more sounds. The footsteps had stopped again, but I could feel him on the other side, waiting. I didn't dare open the door. Instead, I grabbed my phone and backed away from the door, keeping my eyes on it the whole time. I dialed 911, whispering into the phone, telling them where I was, that there was someone in the building. The dispatcher told me to stay calm, that they were sending someone. But staying calm wasn't an option. Not with him so close. As I waited for the police, I kept my eyes on the security feed. The man hadn't moved. He was still there, just standing, staring at the door. I couldn't understand why he wasn't doing anything, just standing there, waiting. The minutes felt like hours. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and fast. Every time the floor creaked or the wind howled outside, I jumped. I kept thinking about what I would do if he tried to come in. There wasn't much in the office I could use to defend myself, just a few pens, a stapler. Nothing that would do much good against someone like him. Finally, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me. The police were close. I watched the man on the screen, waiting for him to react to the sound, but he didn't. He just stood there, his face inches from the door, Then, just as the sirens got louder, he turned and walked away. Calm, like he hadn't been doing anything wrong. He disappeared down the hallway, out of the camera's view. I rushed to the door, peeking out through the small glass window. The hallway was empty. The police arrived moments later, bursting into the building, guns drawn. They searched the entire office, but they didn't find him. The officers asked me if I was sure I hadn't imagined it, if maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. That man wasn't here by accident. He was here for a reason, and whatever it wasn't good. They escorted me out of the building, told me to go home and get some rest. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere, waiting. And that smile, that horrible smile, it stayed with me. I never stayed late at the office again. I was driving home late one night, probably around 1 a.m. The road was empty, just a long stretch of darkness with only my headlights cutting through it. I was on one of those old rural roads in Kentucky, the kind that twists and turns through miles of nothing. No houses, no streetlights, just fields and trees. The rain had started up earlier in the evening, and by the time I was halfway home, it was coming down in sheets. My wipers were struggling to keep up, and visibility was terrible. I saw him standing on the side of the road, just outside the reach of my headlights. At first, I wasn't sure if he was real or just a shadow, but as I got closer, I could make out the shape of a man, soaked from the rain, with his thumb out. I wasn't in the habit of picking up hitchhikers, especially not at that hour, but something about the way he stood there, drenched and desperate, made me slow down. I rolled down the passenger window just a crack, letting the rain hit the side of my face. He leaned in, his eyes wide and hopeful. "Need a ride?" I asked. He nodded quickly, a little too eagerly, but I chalked it up to the weather. I unlocked the door, and he climbed in, water dripping off his clothes and onto the seat. "Thanks, man," he said, shaking his wet hair out of his eyes. This storm came out of nowhere. I just nodded and pulled back onto the road. For the first few minutes, we drove in silence, the only sound being the rain hammering against the car. I tried to focus on the road, but I could feel him watching me out of the corner of my eye. I figured he was just nervous, so I decided to break the silence. "Where are you headed?" I asked. "Just a bit further up," he said, his voice calm. "I was on my way home, but my car broke down." "Bad luck," I muttered. "Yeah," he replied, then turned to me. "So, where are you headed?" "Home," I answered. "Got a place about 30 miles from here." He nodded, then asked, "You live alone?" The question caught me off guard. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Why?" "No reason," he said with a shrug. "Just curious." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I glanced over at him, and he was staring straight ahead, his hands resting on his knees, but there was something off about his posture. Too tense. "You from around here?" he asked after a few more minutes of silence. "Yeah," I replied. "Been here my whole life." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I thought you looked familiar." I frowned. "You know me?" "Maybe," he said, tapping his fingers on his knee. "You ever been to Millersville?" "Yeah, a few times," I answered. "It's not far from here." His smile widened. "That's where I'm from." I nodded, trying to focus on the road, but something about this conversation was starting to feel wrong. He seemed too interested in me, too eager to make a connection. "Do you go there often?" he asked, his tone casual, but there was an edge to it. "Not really," I said. "Just pass through sometimes." He murmured, his fingers still tapping rhythmically on his knee. "You ever go to that diner on Main Street? The one with the blue sign?" I hesitated. "Yeah, I've been there a couple times." "I used to work there," he said, his voice low. "Wonder if you ever saw me." "Maybe," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. He chuckled softly, a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Funny how small the world is, huh?" I didn't respond. Something wasn't right. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was racing. Who was this guy? Why did he seem to know so much about me? "So, do you go out much?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Not really," I answered, my grip tightening on the wheel. "No friends? No family nearby?" "No," I said, feeling more uneasy by the second. He was silent for a moment, then he said, "I used to know a guy like you. Lived alone, didn't talk much to people. Kept to himself. Is that so?" I asked, trying to sound disinterested. "Yeah," he continued, his voice soft but insistent. "He thought he could just go about his life, not bothering anyone, but people noticed him. People always notice." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. "What happened to him?" "Oh, nothing much," he said with a shrug. "Just, one day, he wasn't there anymore. People talked, but no one really knew what happened." I didn't know what to say to that. The rain was still pounding down, making it hard to see, but I kept my eyes glued to the road, trying to ignore the tension building in the car. He shifted in his seat, turning to face me. "You remind me of him, you know." I forced a chuckle, trying to shake off the growing fear. "I guess there are a lot of people like that." "Maybe," he said quietly. "Or maybe there's just something about you." I didn't respond. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. The road was still empty, no sign of any other cars. No one to help if things went wrong. "So," he said after a long pause, "what do you do for fun? You must do something." "Not much," I replied, my voice strained. "Just work, mostly." "Work, huh?" he said, sounding disappointed. "You don't seem like the working type." I clenched my teeth, trying to keep my nerves in check. "What do you mean?" He smirked. "I just mean you look like you've got secrets. Like you're hiding something." I glanced at him, my heart pounding. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do," he said, his tone almost mocking. "We all have secrets." I didn't respond. I just wanted to get him out of my car. The rain was still coming down hard, and the road seemed to stretch on forever. I couldn't see any turnoffs or places to stop. Just endless darkness. He leaned back in his seat, staring out the window. "You ever think about what would happen if you just disappeared? If one day you were just gone?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. He turned to me again, his eyes dark and unreadable. Maybe no one would even notice. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think it's time for you to get out." He smiled, that same cold smile I'd seen earlier. "Are you sure you want me to?" I nodded, my hand shaking on the wheel. "Yeah, I'm sure." He stared at me for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "All right, if that's what you want." I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. He opened the door and stepped out into the rain, but before he closed the door, he leaned back in, his eyes locking onto mine. "Be careful out here," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You never know who you might run into." And with that, he slammed the door and disappeared into the darkness. I didn't wait to see where he went. I just hit the gas and drove, my hands still shaking. I didn't stop until I saw the lights of a town up ahead. When I finally pulled over, my mind was racing with everything that had just happened. I didn't know who he was, but I knew one thing for sure: I'd never pick up a hitchhiker again. I noticed him first about a week ago. There's a small parking lot across from my apartment building in Florida. It's not usually busy, just a few cars during the day, but this guy started showing up every night. He would park his old sedan in the same spot, right across from my window. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just resting or waiting for someone. But then I realized he was always there. Every single night, around 9 p.m., his car would pull up, and he would just sit there. Not doing anything, not even listening to the radio or looking at his phone like most people do when they're waiting. Just sitting in his car, staring straight ahead. I started feeling uneasy after the third night. I could see him clearly from my window, just a dark figure in the driver's seat. He never got out of the car. Never met with anyone. It was like he was watching something, but I couldn't figure out what. I told myself it was just a coincidence, that he had to be waiting for someone or something. But that feeling, the one in the pit of my stomach, it wouldn't go away. One night, I tried to ignore him, but I couldn't. I kept glancing out the window, expecting him to be there. And of course, he was. His car was parked in the same spot, and he was there, sitting silently. It started to get to me. I even tried closing my curtains, but I knew he was still out there. It felt like his presence was creeping through the walls, into my apartment. I started getting paranoid. I checked the window every few minutes, just to see if he was still there. I knew he wasn't doing anything illegal, but it didn't feel right. He didn't belong there, and the more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. Then, one night, I saw him lift something to his face. I squinted, trying to make out what it was, and my stomach dropped when I realized it was a camera. He was taking pictures. Of what, though? I followed the direction of his lens, and it was aimed straight at my window. My heart started racing. I felt exposed, like I was being watched in my own home. I ducked down behind the wall, my breath coming fast. This wasn't just some guy waiting for someone. He was taking pictures of me. I stayed hidden, not daring to peek out again. My mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. Should I call the police? Confront him? After a few minutes, I gathered the courage to look out again. He was still there, still snapping pictures. That was it. I couldn't just sit there and let him do that. I threw on my shoes and grabbed my phone, heading for the door. My hands were shaking as I stomped down the stairs and out of the building. When I got outside, the rain had started to fall, and the air was thick and humid. His car was still there, and I could see him, head down, focused on whatever was on his camera. I marched right up to his window, my anger pushing down the fear. I rapped hard on the glass. "Hey!" I yelled, louder than I meant to. "What the hell are you doing?" He jumped, startled, and looked at me with wide eyes. For a second, he just sat there, like he didn't know what to do. Then, without a word, he started his car. The engine roared to life, and before I could say anything else, he sped off, tires screeching on the wet pavement. I stood there, drenched in the rain, watching his taillights disappear into the night. My heart was still pounding in my chest, and my hands were shaking. What had just happened? I didn't know who he was or why he was taking pictures of me, but I felt a deep sense of violation. My apartment, my safe space, suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. I didn't know what to do next. Should I call the police? What would I even tell them? That some guy in a car was taking pictures. It felt like such a small thing, but it wasn't. Not to me. I decided to wait it out, see if he came back the next night. But he didn't. The next night, his usual parking spot was empty. No car. No strange man with a camera. I thought maybe I had scared him off. Maybe he realized he couldn't get away with whatever he was doing. But the unease didn't go away. I kept expecting him to return, to see that car sitting there again, watching. Days passed, and I tried to convince myself that it was over. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even when his car wasn't there. I started checking my windows obsessively, every time I entered a room. I couldn't relax, couldn't sleep properly. Every little noise made me jump. A week later, I was heading out to work when I noticed something stuck under my windshield wiper. It was a small, white envelope. My stomach churned as I opened it, my hands trembling. Inside was a single photo. It was a picture of me, standing in my window, looking out. I recognized the moment. It was from that night, the one where I saw him taking pictures. I dropped the photo like it was burning me, my mind racing with panic. He knew where I lived. He had been close enough to leave this. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't safe. I called the police after that. I showed them the picture, told them about the man in the car. They said they'd keep an eye on my building, but I could tell they didn't take it as seriously as I did. They didn't know the fear that had settled deep inside me. I spent the next few nights at a friend's place, too scared to be alone in my apartment. I tried to go back after a while, tried to tell myself that it was over. But every time I stepped into my home, I felt his eyes on me, even though I knew he wasn't there. The fear never really left. Eventually, I moved. I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. I couldn't live with the constant dread. I found a new place, far from that parking lot, far from the memories of that night. But even now, sometimes I catch myself looking over my shoulder, checking the windows. I don't think I'll ever really feel safe again. It was late, probably around midnight, when I pulled into the gas station. I was on my way home from a long drive and my tank was almost empty. The place was one of those old, run-down stations in the middle of nowhere, but it was the only one around for miles. The neon sign flickered above me as I got out of the car and started filling up the tank. The whole area was quiet, too quiet, except for the distant hum of crickets. I hadn't planned on using the restroom, but the long drive and a few too many sodas had caught up with me. The gas station building was small, just a little convenience store with a couple of dim lights inside. I finished pumping the gas, grabbed my keys, and walked inside. The guy behind the counter barely looked up when I came in. He seemed like he was half asleep, leaning on the counter with his hat pulled low over his eyes. The restroom was in the back, down a narrow, dimly lit hallway. It wasn't the cleanest place, but I didn't really care. I just wanted to get back on the road as soon as possible. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The bathroom was small, with cracked tiles and a dirty mirror above the sink. The light buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds. I did my business quickly, washed my hands, and reached for the door handle to leave. That's when I noticed something was wrong. The door wouldn't budge. I jiggled the handle a bit, thinking it was just stuck, but it didn't move. I tried harder, twisting it back and forth, but it stayed firmly in place. My heart started to race as I pushed against the door with my shoulder, trying to force it open. Still nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Maybe it was just old, I thought. Maybe it just needed a good shove. I stepped back and threw my weight against it, but it was like hitting a brick wall. The door wasn't moving an inch. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were faint at first, just a soft tapping sound on the tiled floor outside. My heart skipped a beat as they grew louder, closer. Someone was walking down the hallway toward the restroom. I froze, listening, my ear pressed to the door. The footsteps stopped right outside. I held my breath, waiting for something to happen. But instead of hearing the door open, I heard a voice. It was a whisper, soft and raspy, like someone trying not to be heard. John. It said my name. My blood ran cold. I hadn't seen anyone in the station besides the guy at the counter, and I hadn't spoken to him. There was no way anyone knew my name. My mind raced, trying to figure out what was going on. I pressed my ear harder against the door, straining to hear. John, the voice whispered again, dragging out the sound, like it was trying to lure me closer. I backed away from the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. There was no reason anyone should know my name. This wasn't some joke. It felt wrong, all wrong. I looked around the tiny restroom, searching for another way out. There was a small window high up on the wall, but it was too small to crawl through. My only option was the door, and it was jammed shut. I decided to shout. Maybe the guy at the counter would hear me and come help. Hey! I yelled, pounding on the door. The door stuck. Can you open it? Silence. No footsteps, no voice, nothing. Just the faint hum of the light overhead. I pounded again, harder this time. Is anyone out there? I need help. Still nothing. I felt a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. Whoever had been out there was gone, or they were choosing not to respond. My skin prickled with the feeling that I wasn't alone, even though I couldn't hear anyone. I tried the door again, pulling and pushing with all my strength. It didn't make a difference. I was trapped. My breath came in short gasps as I leaned against the door, my mind racing. I didn't know how long I had been in there, but it felt like hours. Then, just when I was about to start shouting again, I heard the footsteps return. This time, they were slower, more deliberate. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped right outside again, and I could hear the person breathing. It was slow, steady, like they were standing just inches from the door. John, the voice whispered again, even softer this time. It sent a chill down my spine. Who's there? I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. My voice echoed in the small room, but I didn't get a response. Just more breathing. I could almost feel the presence of whoever was on the other side. They were waiting for something. I grabbed my phone from my pocket, hands trembling, and tried to call for help. But of course, there was no signal. I cursed under my breath, glancing back at the door. I couldn't just stay in there, waiting for something to happen. I had to get out. Summoning all my courage, I stepped closer to the door and pressed my ear against it again. The breathing had stopped. I couldn't hear anything. Maybe they had gone away. I decided to take a chance. I threw my weight against the door once more, gritting my teeth. The wood creaked, but it didn't give. I pounded on it with my fists, frustration and fear boiling over. "Let me out!" I screamed. Then, I heard a faint click. The door handle turned slowly on its own, and the door creaked open just an inch. My heart leaped into my throat as I stared at the crack, waiting to see who or what was on the other side. But there was no one there. The hallway was empty, the dim light casting long shadows on the floor. My legs felt like jelly as I pushed the door open wider and stepped out. I half expected someone to jump out at me, but there was nothing. Just silence. I hurried down the hallway, my eyes darting around, expecting that voice to return, those footsteps to follow me. When I reached the front of the station, the guy at the counter was still there, looking at me like nothing had happened. I wanted to ask him if he had seen anything, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't say anything. I just paid for my gas and left as fast as I could. When I got back to my car, I locked the doors and sat there for a moment, trying to calm my racing heart. The whole place felt wrong, like it was suffocating me. I glanced back at the gas station as I pulled away. In the rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing by the restroom door, watching me leave. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I sped up, desperate to get away from that place. Even now, I can still hear that voice sometimes, whispering my name when I'm alone. I don't know who or what it was, but I'll never stop at that gas station again. It was a quiet night on the highway, too quiet. I was driving home from a long day at work, just trying to get home as fast as I could. The stretch of road I was on didn't have much traffic, and there were no street lights, just the occasional glow of my headlights cutting through the darkness. Then, out of nowhere, my car started to sputter. The engine made a horrible sound, and before I knew it, the car slowed down to a stop. I tried turning the key again, but all I got was a click. My heart sank. I was alone, stuck in the middle of nowhere, and my phone had barely any signal. I sat there for a moment, hoping someone would pass by soon. The highway was deserted, though, and all I could hear was the wind howling outside. I was starting to think about walking to the nearest gas station, even though I had no idea how far it was, when I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. A truck slowed down as it approached me, and I felt a tiny bit of relief. Maybe I wasn't going to be stranded after all. The truck pulled over in front of me, and I watched as a man got out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He walked toward me, and I rolled down my window just enough to talk to him. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice deep and rough. "Yeah," I said. "It just died on me." He nodded, glancing around like he was sizing up the situation. "I can take a look if you want," he offered. I hesitated for a moment. Something about him made me uneasy, but I didn't have much of a choice. "Okay," I said, stepping out of the car. As I walked around to the front, he stayed behind me, moving a little too close for comfort. I tried to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. Maybe he was just trying to help, but the way he was standing, it made me nervous. I popped the hood, and he leaned over to take a look. That's when I noticed it, his hand. He was holding something behind his back, something small and metallic, and my stomach turned. I took a step back, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's that in your hand?" He turned to face me, and I saw the gleam of a knife in the dim light. He didn't say anything, just smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, more like he was enjoying the fact that I had noticed. "I was just going to help," he said, taking a step closer. "But you know, it's dangerous out here for a woman alone." My heart started pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get out of there, but my legs felt like they were glued to the ground. "I'm fine," I said, trying to sound confident. "I'll just call a tow truck." He shook his head, still smiling. "No need for that. I can give you a ride. Come on, it's safer with me." I backed up slowly, my eyes darting to my car. If I could just get back inside and lock the doors, maybe I could buy some time. But he saw what I was doing, and he moved to block my path. "Don't make this difficult," he said, his voice low now, threatening. I tried to keep calm, but I could feel the panic rising in my throat. "Please, just let me go," I said. He didn't answer. He just kept moving closer, the knife glinting in his hand. I knew I had to act fast, so I turned and ran, my feet pounding against the pavement. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps getting louder as he chased after me. My car was just a few feet away, but it felt like miles. I could feel his presence right behind me, his breath on the back of my neck. I lunged for the door, yanking it open and diving inside. I slammed it shut just as he reached me, his hand slapping against the window. I locked the doors and fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely dial. He was outside, staring at me through the glass, the knife still in his hand. He didn't try to break the window, just stood there, smiling that awful smile. Finally, I managed to call 911. I told the operator where I was, my voice barely above a whisper. The man just kept staring at me, like he was daring me to make a move. The minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. He didn't leave, didn't try to get inside the car. He just watched me, his eyes following my every move. When I saw the flashing lights in the distance, he finally backed away. He didn't run, just walked back to his truck like nothing had happened. I watched as he drove off, disappearing into the darkness. The police arrived a few minutes later, but by then, he was long gone. I told them everything, but there wasn't much they could do. No license plate, no witnesses, just a creepy guy with a knife who had tried to corner me on a deserted highway. They gave me a ride to the nearest town, and I waited there until a tow truck came for my car. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere, watching me. I haven't driven that stretch of road since, and I don't plan to. Every time I think about it, I see his face, that twisted smile, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away in time. I agreed to house sit for a friend who was going out of town for a week. It seemed like a simple favor at first. Watch the house, feed the cat, and make sure everything was locked up at night. The house was in a quiet suburb in Oregon, the kind of place where nothing much ever happens. I figured it would be an easy gig, just some time to myself in a nice house. The first night was uneventful. I settled in, made myself some dinner, and watched TV. The house was pretty big, bigger than my apartment, and it felt a little too empty. The silence was noticeable, but I didn't think much of it. I locked the doors and windows before heading to bed, trying to get comfortable in an unfamiliar bed. Sometime around midnight, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me, but then I heard a faint noise, like something shuffling or scratching. It sounded like it was coming from the basement. My heart started racing, but I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was just the cat. I lay there for a few minutes, listening. The noise continued, a soft thumping sound now, like someone moving things around down there. I told myself it was probably just the old house settling or the wind outside. But the noise didn't stop. Finally, I decided to check it out. I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and headed downstairs. The house was pitch black, except for the beam of the flashlight cutting through the darkness. The stairs creaked under my weight, and each step seemed louder than the last. When I reached the basement door, I hesitated. The noise had stopped, and everything was quiet again. I almost turned back, but something in me needed to see what was down there. I slowly opened the door and shined the flashlight down the stairs. The basement was cold and musty, the air thick with the smell of damp concrete. I stepped down into the basement, my eyes scanning the room. There were old boxes, some tools, and a washing machine in the corner. Nothing seemed out of place. I was about to turn around and head back upstairs when I noticed something strange. There was a section of the wall that looked different, like the paint was newer, fresher than the rest. I walked over to it, and that's when I saw it, a small door, almost hidden behind a shelf. The door was wooden, with no handle, just a latch. It didn't look like it had been used in years. My stomach turned, but I felt like I had to open it, like I needed to know what was inside. I unlatched the door and slowly pulled it open. The smell hit me first, a foul, rotting odor that made me gag. I shined the flashlight inside and froze. The room beyond was small, barely more than a closet, but it was filled with the most disturbing things I'd ever seen. There were old, dirty mattresses stacked against one wall, with dark stains all over them. Chains hung from the ceiling, and the floor was littered with broken glass and pieces of old clothing. In the corner, I saw a pile of photographs. They were of different people, all looking terrified, their eyes wide with fear. Some of the photos were torn, others were crumpled, but they all had the same expression, like they were staring into the face of something horrible. My hands were shaking, and I wanted to get out of there, but my legs felt like they were stuck to the floor. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. Then, I heard it, the sound of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and they were coming down the basement stairs. I turned out the flashlight and backed into the corner, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps grew louder, and then I saw a shadow at the top of the stairs. Someone was there, standing in the doorway, just out of sight. I held my breath, praying that whoever it was wouldn't notice me. But then the footsteps started again, coming down the stairs, one slow step at a time. I could hear them breathing now, heavy and labored, like they were excited. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped in that horrible little room, with nowhere to run. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but all I could do was stare at the door, waiting for it to open. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. There was a long silence, and then I heard the door creak open. A figure stood in the doorway, barely visible in the darkness. I could see the outline of a man, tall and broad, his face hidden in the shadows. He didn't move at first, just stood there, staring into the room. I could feel his eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. My whole body was trembling, and I thought I was going to pass out. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back up the stairs. I waited until I couldn't hear his footsteps anymore, then slowly crept out of the room. My legs were weak, and I felt like I was going to collapse at any moment. I didn't stop to grab anything, just ran out of the basement, through the house, and out the front door. I didn't care about the rain pouring down or the fact that I was barefoot. I just ran, as fast as I could, until I reached the neighbor's house. I pounded on their door, desperate for someone to help me. When they finally answered, I couldn't even explain what had happened. I just kept saying I needed to leave, that something was wrong in that house. The police came later, but they didn't find anyone in the house. The basement door was closed, and when they opened it, the room was empty. No photos, no chains, nothing. It was like I had imagined the whole thing, but I knew what I saw, what I felt. I never went back to that house, and I haven't spoken to my friends since. I don't know what was going on in that basement, but I'm sure of one thing: I was never supposed to find that door, and I was lucky to get out of there alive. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard the knock on the door. It was soft, almost hesitant, but it was enough to pull me out of the half-sleep I had been in. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at that hour, so my first instinct was to ignore it. But then it came again, a little louder this time. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, straining to hear anything else. The house was dead silent except for the sound of rain hitting the windows. I got up and grabbed my phone, just in case. As I made my way to the front door, I could feel the anxiety building up in my chest. I wasn't sure if I should even look, but something compelled me to check. When I reached the door, I hesitated for a moment before peering through the peephole. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a young girl standing on my porch. She looked to be about 9 or 10 years old, soaking wet from the rain, her blonde hair plastered to her face. She was crying, but her sobs were eerily quiet. Just looking at her made me feel uneasy. Something wasn't right. I stood there, frozen, staring at her through the peephole. I wanted to help, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her clothes didn't seem right. They were too clean, too neat, like she had just stepped out of a store display. And the way she was standing, so stiff, almost unnatural, made my skin crawl. She knocked again, harder this time, and whispered, "Please, let me in." Her voice was high-pitched and shaky, but there was something strange about it, like she was trying too hard to sound scared. My mind raced with questions. Why was she out there alone in the middle of the night? Where were her parents? I couldn't just leave her out there, but I also couldn't bring myself to open the door. I leaned closer to the peephole, trying to get a better look. That's when I noticed something that sent chills down my spine: her eyes. They weren't red and puffy from crying like I'd expect. They were wide open, almost too wide, and they weren't blinking. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering in my chest. Something was very wrong. I knew I should call the police, but I couldn't make myself move. All I could do was stand there, staring at the door, trying to make sense of what I had seen. Then, she knocked again, even louder, almost frantic. "Please, let me in," she begged, her voice more forceful this time. It wasn't a request anymore, it was a demand. I took a step back, my hand shaking as I gripped my phone. I couldn't open the door. I just couldn't. I decided to call 911. As I dialed, I kept my eyes on the door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. The operator picked up, and I quickly explained the situation, trying to keep my voice steady. They assured me that they were sending someone over, but it would take a few minutes. The girl must have heard me talking, because her knocks turned into pounding. "Let me in. Please," she screamed, her voice no longer sounding scared but angry, almost furious. I could hear the desperation, but it didn't sound like the desperation of a child. It sounded wrong, like she was trying to manipulate me. I backed away further, moving into the living room, putting more distance between myself and the door. The pounding didn't stop. It just got louder and more erratic, like she was hitting the door with everything she had. I could hear her voice, low and guttural now, almost like she was growling between her words. "Let me in, let me in, let me in." I felt trapped. The walls of my house, which had always felt so safe, now felt like they were closing in on me. I glanced at the windows, wondering if she might try to get in through one of them. I pulled the curtain shut, trying to block out any sight of her. But I could still hear her, still feel her presence just outside my door. Suddenly, everything went quiet. The pounding stopped, and there was no more screaming. Just silence. For a moment, I thought maybe she had left, maybe she had given up. But then, I heard a faint tapping on the window behind me. I whipped around, my breath catching in my throat. There she was, standing just outside the window, her face pressed up against the glass. She wasn't crying anymore. She was smiling, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched across her face. Her eyes were still wide open, unblinking, staring right at me. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my phone. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. She tapped on the glass again, her fingers leaving wet smudges on the window. "Let me in," she whispered, her voice muffled by the glass but still clear enough to send shivers down my spine. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was stuck in a nightmare, unable to wake up. I could still hear the rain outside, the steady patter against the roof, but it felt distant, like it was happening in another world. All that existed in that moment was her face, her voice, her unblinking eyes. The police arrived a few minutes later, though it felt like hours. I heard their car pull up, saw the flashing lights through the curtains. I rushed to the door, flung it open, and ran out to meet them. I didn't care about the rain soaking through my clothes. I just wanted to get away from the house. When I pointed to the window where I had seen her, she was gone. The officers searched the area, but they didn't find anyone. No footprints in the mud, no sign that anyone had been there at all. They told me it was probably just some kid playing a prank, but I knew better. I stayed with a friend that night. I couldn't go back to that house, not after what happened. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, waiting, watching, hoping for another chance to get inside. I had heard stories about an abandoned warehouse on the edge of Detroit, the kind of place that piques your curiosity. They said it was old, run down, and no one went near it anymore. But the idea of exploring it was too tempting. So, one night, I decided to check it out. I figured I'd be in and out quickly. Nothing too adventurous, just a bit of exploring. I drove up there late, when the city was quiet and the streets were empty. The warehouse was even more imposing than I had imagined, a hulking structure with broken windows and a crumbling facade. The rain had been pouring all day, and the ground was a mess of mud and puddles. I parked my car a short distance away and made my way to the building. The front entrance was partially blocked by debris, but I managed to squeeze through. Inside, it was dark and cold. The air smelled musty, and the floor was littered with trash. I turned on my flashlight and started walking deeper into the warehouse. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating piles of old crates and rusted machinery. As I moved further, I noticed something odd: footprints in the dust. They were recent, clearly not from someone who had been gone for years. The tracks led towards a section of the warehouse that was less cluttered. My curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the trail. The footprints led to a small office area, where I found discarded food wrappers and empty cans. It looked like someone had been living here, or at least using the place recently. My heart started racing. I had come here alone, and the thought of someone else being around made me uneasy. As I continued exploring, I came across something that made my blood run cold. Fresh blood on the floor. It was smeared and splattered, not enough to be from a major injury, but definitely recent. I took a step back, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The sight of the blood made me rethink my decision to come here. I turned to leave, feeling a wave of panic. I retraced my steps, trying to move as quickly as possible without making any noise. But just as I was nearing the exit, I heard voices. They were muffled at first, but getting closer. I stopped dead in my tracks and listened. The voices were coming from behind me, from the area I had just left. I couldn't make out all the words, but I heard enough to understand what they were talking about. They were discussing what to do with their intruder. I felt a rush of terror. I was the intruder they were talking about. I couldn't stay here, not with these people, whoever they were, planning something. I had to find another way out. I turned off my flashlight and tried to find a hiding spot. There was a stack of old crates nearby, so I crouched behind them, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I could hear the voices clearly now, and they sounded closer. The conversation was low, but I caught snippets of it. "They know we're here," one voice said, sounding annoyed. "We need to deal with them before they get out." I couldn't see anyone, but I could tell they were moving around, their footsteps echoing off the walls. My heart was pounding so loudly I was afraid they'd hear it. I tried to control my breathing, but it was difficult. The voices were now just a few feet away. I could make out two distinct voices, one sounding older and more authoritative, and the other more anxious. They were discussing options, arguing about what to do next. I could sense the tension in their voices, the sense of urgency. I waited in my hiding spot, barely daring to move. I heard a door creak open and then slam shut. The voices moved further away, and I slowly peeked out from behind the crates. The warehouse was silent again, except for the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. I decided it was now or never. I needed to get out before they came back. I moved carefully, trying to avoid any noise. I made my way back to the entrance, keeping to the shadows. As I approached the exit, I glanced back to make sure no one was following me. When I finally got outside, I didn't stop to catch my breath. I ran to my car, my heart still racing. The rain was coming down harder now, but I barely noticed. I fumbled with my keys, finally getting the car door open. I got inside and locked the doors, my hands shaking. I started the car and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was well away from the warehouse. Even then, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the whole experience in my head, the blood, the voices, the fear. The night started out perfect. The beach party was in full swing, with music playing and people laughing. The bonfire was warm, and the sound of the waves crashing made everything feel like a dream. I was with my friends, and we were having a great time. Then, out of nowhere, a group of strangers appeared. There were about 6 of them, and they looked rough. They weren't invited. They walked straight up to the bonfire and started making themselves at home, grabbing drinks and talking loudly. The atmosphere changed instantly. I noticed one of them, a tall guy with a shaved head, staring at me. It made me uncomfortable. I tried to ignore him and continued talking to my friends, but I could feel his eyes on me. My friend, Lisa, nudged me and whispered that we should leave. I nodded, agreeing. Just as we were about to gather our things, the tall guy approached us. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He asked if we were leaving already. His tone was friendly, but there was something off about it. We told him we were just moving to another spot on the beach, but he insisted we stay. I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to make a scene. I tried to be polite and told him we'd stay a bit longer. He seemed satisfied with that and walked back to his group. I glanced at Lisa, who looked as nervous as I felt. Minutes passed, and the strangers were getting louder and more aggressive. They were starting to harass other people at the party, pushing and shoving, trying to start fights. I knew we had to get out of there. I told Lisa we should just make a run for it. She agreed. We slowly started moving away from the bonfire, trying not to draw attention. Just as we were about to break into a run, one of the strangers, a woman with short hair, grabbed Lisa's arm. She yanked her back and started yelling at us, accusing us of being rude and trying to ditch them. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what to do. I tried to pull Lisa away, but the woman wouldn't let go. The tall guy saw what was happening and started walking toward us. I knew we were in trouble. I yelled for help, but everyone else was either too scared or too drunk to do anything. The tall guy grabbed my arm, and his grip was like iron. He told us we weren't going anywhere. Panic set in. I had to do something. I remembered the whistle I had on my keychain. I grabbed it and blew as hard as I could. The shrill sound pierced the night, and for a moment, everything stopped. People started looking our way. The tall guy and the woman let go of us, but their eyes were filled with anger. I took the chance and grabbed Lisa's hand. We ran as fast as we could, not looking back. I could hear them shouting behind us, but I didn't stop. We reached the parking lot, out of breath. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. I finally found them and unlocked the car. We jumped in and locked the doors. I started the engine and sped away, not caring about the speed limit. I just wanted to get as far away as possible. We drove in silence for a while, both of us too shaken to speak. Finally, Lisa broke the silence. She thanked me for getting us out of there. I nodded, still trying to calm down. We decided to go to her place since it was closer. We didn't feel safe going back to the party. When we got to Lisa's house, we locked all the doors and windows. We called the police and told them what happened. They said they'd send someone to check it out. We didn't know if they'd do anything, but it made us feel a little better. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of those strangers. I kept thinking about what could have happened if we hadn't gotten away. The fear and adrenaline from the night still lingered. The next morning, we heard from some friends that the police showed up at the beach. The strangers were gone, but they found signs of a fight. No one was seriously hurt, but the party was over. I was relieved it didn't end worse, but I knew I wouldn't feel safe for a long time. Lisa and I stuck together for the next few days. We didn't go out much, and when we did, we stayed in crowded places. The experience changed us. We were more cautious, more aware of our surroundings. We didn't want to take any chances. Eventually, things started to go back to normal. But I'll never forget that night. It taught me that danger can appear out of nowhere, and you have to be ready. I was grateful we got out safe, but I knew not everyone was that lucky. The fear stayed with me, a reminder of how quickly things can turn. I learned to trust my instincts and to act fast when something feels wrong. It's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. I had booked a last-minute stay at a hotel in a small town for a relaxing summer break. I needed some time away from my hectic schedule, and this place looked perfect for a quiet getaway. The hotel was old but charming, with vintage decor and a cozy atmosphere. I arrived late in the afternoon and checked in without any issues. The front desk clerk, a young woman with a kind smile, handed me the key to my room and gave me directions. I was tired from the drive, so I headed straight to my room, eager to unwind. Everything seemed normal until I noticed a group of men loitering near the lobby. They were dressed in dark clothes and kept glancing towards me as I walked past. It felt a bit odd, but I brushed it off. As I settled into my room, I heard muffled voices in the hallway and the sound of heavy footsteps. It was odd, but I tried to ignore it. I was in the middle of reading a book when there was a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening it. When I peeked through the peephole, I saw two men in suits standing outside. They looked serious and seemed impatient. I opened the door cautiously, and one of the men introduced himself as a detective. He said there had been a mix-up with the hotel booking and asked if he could come in to ask a few questions. I was taken aback but let them in, hoping it was just a routine check. They started asking questions about my background, my reason for visiting, and my plans while I was in town. I answered everything truthfully, thinking it was just standard procedure. But their questions seemed to delve deeper and felt oddly intrusive. The men seemed unsatisfied with my answers and started looking around my room. I began to feel uneasy. One of them even asked if I had been in contact with anyone unusual. I had no idea what they were talking about. When I tried to ask what this was about, they avoided giving a clear answer. They only said there had been some confusion and that they needed to check something. The whole situation felt wrong, and I started to get anxious. The detective's demeanor was intimidating, and I felt trapped. After they left, I tried to call the hotel manager to get some clarity, but the line was busy. I decided to go downstairs to see if I could find out more. The lobby was eerily quiet, and the front desk clerk was nowhere to be found. The group of men I had seen earlier was now gathered around a corner, talking quietly. I tried to approach them, but they quickly dispersed when they saw me coming. I felt more uneasy than ever. I knew I had to get out of the hotel and find a safe place, but I didn't know who to trust. I decided to leave and find a nearby police station to explain what was happening. As I walked towards the exit, I noticed a man following me. He was trying to stay hidden, but I could see him in the reflection of the glass doors. My heart raced. I quickened my pace, hoping to lose him. I reached the parking lot and saw my car, but I hesitated. If the man was working with the detectives, I wouldn't be safe there. I looked around and saw a small diner across the street. I headed there, hoping to find some help or at least get away from the hotel. Inside the diner, I explained my situation to the waitress and asked to use the phone. She let me use the phone in the back room. I managed to get through to the local police and explained everything. They said they would send someone over to the diner to help me. While waiting, I stayed inside the diner, trying to stay calm. When the police arrived, they took my statement and assured me they would look into the situation. They contacted the hotel and the supposed detectives. It turned out that the men were not real detectives but imposters involved in a criminal scheme. They had been using the hotel as a front to look for people to intimidate and coerce. The real police were able to secure the hotel and arrest the imposters. I was relieved but shaken by the whole experience. The hotel manager apologized for the mix-up and offered to move me to a different room, but I declined. I packed up my things and checked out as soon as I could. The local police gave me a safe route out of town and advised me to report any further suspicious activity. I drove back home, feeling a mix of relief and unease. The experience had been terrifying, and it took me a while to shake off the anxiety. I decided to take a solo camping trip to clear my mind. The stress of work and daily life had been getting to me. I picked a remote spot in the woods, far from civilization. The first day was peaceful. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and enjoyed the solitude. As night fell, I sat by the campfire, listening to the sounds of the forest. It was calming until I heard a faint rustling in the bushes. I dismissed it as an animal and went to bed. The next morning, I found footprints around my campsite. They were too big to be from an animal. My heart started to race. I tried to convince myself it was another camper, but I hadn't seen anyone else around. I decided to stay vigilant. Throughout the day, I explored the area but kept close to my camp. As the sun set, I gathered more wood for the fire. The night was eerily quiet. Around midnight, I heard the rustling again, this time closer. I cracked my flashlight and shone it towards the noise. The light caught a glimpse of a figure darting behind a tree. Panic set in. I shouted, asking who was there, but got no response. I stayed up all night, watching and listening. By morning, I was exhausted. I decided to pack up and leave. As I was dismantling my tent, I noticed something on a nearby tree. It was a small carving, fresh and deliberate. It looked like an arrow pointing deeper into the woods. Ignoring it seemed like the best option. I continued packing, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I hurried, wanting to get out of there as fast as possible. As I was about to leave, I found my map missing. I searched frantically but couldn't find it. Someone had taken it. With no map, I had to rely on memory. I started walking back the way I came, but the dense forest all looked the same. Every snap of a twig made me jump. I felt like I was being herded in a specific direction. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I broke into a run, not daring to look back. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in gasps. I stumbled over roots and branches, but I kept going. The footsteps seemed to be getting closer. In my panic, I tripped and fell hard, scraping my knees and hands. As I lay there, trying to catch my breath, I saw him. A man, rugged and unkempt, standing a few yards away, holding my map. He stared at me with cold, calculating eyes. I scrambled to my feet and backed away slowly. He didn't move, just watched me. I turned and ran again, faster than before. I could hear him following, his pace steady and relentless. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. I spotted a small cave ahead and darted inside, hoping he wouldn't see me. I crouched in the darkness, trying to quiet my breathing. Minutes felt like hours as I waited. I heard him walk past the cave, his footsteps fading into the distance. I stayed hidden for a long time, afraid to move. When I finally emerged, the sun was setting. I needed to find my way back before nightfall. I walked cautiously, every sound putting me on edge. I felt like I was being watched again. As darkness fell, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, but but it was shelter. I decided to hide there for the night. Inside, the cabin was musty and filled with cobwebs. I barricaded the door with an old table and sat in a corner, clutching a broken piece of wood as a weapon. The silence was oppressive. I tried to stay awake, but exhaustion took over. I woke to the sound of the door creaking open. My heart leaped into my throat as I saw the man standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. He stepped inside slowly, savoring the fear in my eyes. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. He spoke in a low, gravelly voice, saying he had been watching me since I arrived. He enjoyed the hunt. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. I noticed a small window behind me. It was my only chance. I grabbed a piece of wood and lunged at him, catching him off guard. He staggered back, and I took the opportunity to dive through the window. Glass shattered around me as I hit the ground hard. I didn't look back. I ran with everything I had, my lungs burning, my legs feeling like lead. I could hear him cursing behind me. The forest seemed endless, but I pushed on, driven by sheer terror. I stumbled upon a stream and followed it, hoping it would lead me to safety. As dawn broke, I finally saw signs of civilization. A dirt road appeared ahead, and I ran towards it. I flagged down the first car I saw, a kind elderly couple who immediately took me to the nearest police station. I was shaken and exhausted, but I was safe. The police took my statement and assured me they would search the area. Days later, I found out they hadn't found the man. The thought that he was still out there haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in the safety of my own home. The solo camping trip that was supposed to bring peace had turned into a nightmare. I never went camping alone again. The fear stayed with me, a constant reminder of how close I came to losing everything. I was in Las Vegas for my summer vacation, just trying to unwind and maybe get lucky at the casinos. I never expected to win big, but there I was, sitting at a blackjack table with a massive pile of chips in front of me. I couldn't believe my luck. I cashed out, and they handed me a thick envelope full of money. I felt like I was on top of the world. As I walked out of the casino, I noticed a group of guys who had been hanging around the blackjack tables. They were watching me closely. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but when I stepped outside, I saw them again. They were talking among themselves, glancing my way. I tried to shake it off and headed to the parking lot. My car was parked a little far from the entrance, and as I walked, I kept looking over my shoulder. The group was following me, keeping a distance but definitely on my trail. My heart started to race. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't want to panic. I picked up my pace, trying to stay calm. I reached my car and quickly got in, locking the doors behind me. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, hoping I could lose them in traffic. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw their car pulling out too, following me. I drove aimlessly for a while, taking random turns, trying to shake them off. But they were persistent, sticking to me no matter where I went. I needed a plan. I remembered there was a police station a few blocks away. If I could just get there, I'd be safe. I made a sharp turn and headed towards the station, but their car sped up, closing the gap between us. I could see the determination in their eyes, and it scared the hell out of me. I had to think fast. I spotted a crowded shopping mall up ahead and decided to pull in. I parked my car and ran into the mall, hoping to lose them in the crowd. I weaved through people, looking for a security guard or a safe place to hide. I saw a sign for the restrooms and ducked inside, hiding in a stall. My heart was pounding, and I could barely catch my breath. I heard the door to the restroom open, and my stomach dropped. They were in here, looking for me. I stayed as quiet as I could, trying not to make a sound. I heard their footsteps, the murmur of their voices. They were checking each stall, one by one. When they reached mine, they kicked the door open. I acted on instinct, shoving one of them back and bolting out of the restroom. I ran through the mall, dodging shoppers, my mind racing. I needed to find help. I saw a security guard near the entrance and ran to him, yelling for help. The guard saw the panic in my eyes and stepped in front of me, blocking the thugs who were chasing me. He called for backup on his radio, and within minutes, more guards arrived. The thugs hesitated, realizing they were outnumbered. They backed off, blending into the crowd and disappearing. I explained everything to the guards, and they escorted me to a safe room. They called the police, who arrived and took my statement. They told me I was lucky to have escaped, that these guys were known for targeting big winners at the casinos. I felt a mix of relief and fear, knowing how close I had come to losing everything. The police took me to my car and made sure I got back to my hotel safely. I spent the rest of my vacation looking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. I was grateful to be safe, but the experience left a scar. I learned to be more cautious, to trust my instincts. Winning big at the casino was supposed to be a dream come true, but it wasn't. I always wanted to explore the jungle. It sounded like an adventure, so when I got the chance to visit South America, I jumped at it. I arrived at a small town near the jungle and found a guide, a local named Raul. He seemed friendly and knowledgeable, perfect for the trip I had in mind. We set off early in the morning, the air humid and buzzing with insects. Raul led the way, cutting through the thick foliage with his machete. I followed closely, eager to see the wonders of the jungle. The deeper we went, the more isolated it felt. The town was miles away, and it was just the two of us surrounded by towering trees and dense underbrush. Raul seemed to know his way around well. He pointed out various plants and animals, explaining their uses and dangers. His knowledge was impressive, and I felt like I was in good hands. After a few hours, we reached a small clearing, and Raul suggested we take a break. We sat down, drank some water, and chatted about the jungle and its secrets. After the break, Raul said he knew a spot deeper in the jungle that few tourists ever see. It sounded intriguing, so I agreed to follow him. As we walked, the path became less distinct, and I started to feel uneasy. The dense vegetation seemed to close in around us, and the sounds of the jungle grew louder. Raul's demeanor began to change. He became quieter, his answers short and clipped. I noticed he was glancing at me more frequently, his eyes hard and calculating. My unease grew, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid. We reached another clearing, smaller than the first. Raul stopped and turned to face me. His friendly smile was gone, replaced by a cold, menacing look. He told me that this part of the jungle was dangerous and that it would be easy for someone to get lost and never be found. A chill ran down my spine. I realized I had made a mistake trusting him. I tried to remain calm, asking him what he meant by that. Raul took a step closer, his hand resting on the handle of his machete. He told me he needed my money and belongings, and if I wanted to leave the jungle alive, I would give them to him without a fuss. Panic surged through me. I knew I had to think fast. I handed over my wallet and watch, trying to buy some time. Raoul seemed pleased, but I could see he wasn't done yet. He demanded I give him everything, including my backpack and camera. I complied, my mind racing with possible escape plans. Raoul then gestured for me to start walking back the way we came. He followed closely, his machete glinting in the dim light. I knew I couldn't outrun him, but I had to try something. As we walked, I kept an eye out for anything I could use to my advantage. We came to a narrow path with dense underbrush on either side. I pretended to trip, falling to the ground. Raoul laughed, but as he moved to help me up, I grabbed a handful of dirt and threw it in his face. He yelled, blinded for a moment, and I took off running. Branches scratched my face and arms as I barreled through the jungle, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear Raoul shouting behind me, his footsteps crashing through the underbrush. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving. The jungle seemed endless, a maze of trees and vines. I stumbled into a small stream and followed it, hoping it would lead me to safety. The water was cool against my burning skin, but I didn't stop. I could still hear Raoul in the distance, getting closer. I spotted a large tree with thick, low branches and scrambled up, hoping to hide. I climbed as high as I could, my breath coming in ragged gasps. From my perch, I watched as Raoul entered the clearing below. He looked around, frustrated, but didn't see me. After a few minutes, he cursed and moved on. I stayed in the tree until I was sure he was gone. My muscles ached, and my clothes were torn and muddy. Carefully, I climbed down and continued following the stream, praying it would lead me to safety. I knew I couldn't go back the way I came, and I had no idea how far I was from the nearest town. Hours passed, and the jungle began to thin out. I stumbled into another clearing, this one with a small hut. An old man was sitting outside, and when he saw me, he rushed over. He spoke little English, but he understood enough to know I was in trouble. He gave me water and let me rest while he contacted the authorities. It took a while, but eventually, help arrived. They found Raoul's trail and arrested him. I learned later that he had been robbing and threatening tourists for years, using his knowledge of the jungle to his advantage. I was shaken but relieved to be safe. The experience left me with a deep respect for the jungle and a wary eye for those who offer their help too easily. I noticed a man early in the morning, dressed in a utility worker uniform, inspecting the houses on my street. He wore a hard hat and had a tool belt slung around his waist. He seemed to be checking the meters or something. I didn't think much of it at first. Utility workers come by often enough. It wasn't until he lingered in front of my house longer than usual that I got suspicious. He kept glancing around nervously, which put me on edge. I decided to watch him for a bit from my window, just to be sure everything was all right. He moved to my front door and took out a small device, pretending to skin something. I felt a pit in my stomach. I knew something wasn't right. I kept watching, my heart pounding. He then walked around to the side of my house, out of my line of sight. I quickly moved to another window to keep an eye on him. That's when I saw him trying to open one of the windows. He was no utility worker. This was a burglar, plain and simple. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. My police training kicked in. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed my phone and called the police, whispering the situation to the dispatcher. I didn't want to alert the burglar that I was onto him. I then went to my closet and pulled out my old service weapon. I hadn't used it in years, but I kept it clean and ready, just in case. I crept down the stairs, trying to be as quiet as possible. I could hear the man now, jiggling the window lock, muttering to himself. I positioned myself near the back door, my gun in hand. I knew I had to confront him, but I didn't want to shoot unless I absolutely had to. The window finally gave way, and I heard him climbing inside. I took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway, my gun aimed at him. "Stop right there," I shouted. The man froze, his eyes wide with shock. He didn't expect anyone to be home, let alone armed. "Get down on the ground, hands behind your head," I ordered. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly lowered himself to the floor. I kept my gun trained on him, my heart racing. I didn't know if he was armed, but I couldn't take any chances. I moved closer, still keeping my distance. "Why are you breaking into my house?" I demanded. He didn't answer, just stared at me with a mix of fear and anger. I could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. Relief washed over me. The police arrived within minutes, bursting through the front door. I kept my gun pointed at the man until the officers took over, cuffing him and hauling him to his feet. I finally lowered my weapon, my hand shaking. One of the officers, a young woman, came over to me. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. "I'm fine, just a bit shaken up," I replied. She took my statement while her colleagues searched the man and the rest of the house. They found burglary tools in his pockets and a knife. I shuddered at the thought of what could have happened if I hadn't been prepared. The officers led the man out to their patrol car, and I watched from the doorway, still in disbelief. After they left, I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking everything. I sat down in the living room, trying to calm myself. It was over, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Someone had tried to invade my home, my sanctuary. I called my wife, who was out of town visiting family. I told her what happened, trying to sound calm, but I could hear the fear in my voice. She was shocked and worried, but I assured her I was okay. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump, every creak of the house set my heart racing. I kept my gun close, just in case. The image of the man's face, his wide eyes staring at me, was burned into my mind. In the days that followed, I installed a security system, complete with cameras and alarms. I needed to feel safe again, needed to know that my home was protected. The police kept me updated on the case. The man was a known burglar, wanted for several break-ins in the area. It took a while, but I eventually started to feel normal again. I went back to my routine, though I was always more cautious, always more aware of my surroundings. The experience had changed me, made me realize how vulnerable we all are. I was grateful for my training, for the skills that allowed me to protect my home. But more than that, I was grateful that it ended without anyone getting hurt. It was a terrifying reminder of how quickly things can go wrong, but also of the strength we find in ourselves when we need it most. I was home one evening, just relaxing after work. My phone buzzed, and I picked it up, expecting a message from a friend or some random notification. Instead, there was a text from an unknown number. It said, "Nice book you're reading." I glanced around, feeling a bit uneasy, but then brushed it off as a weird prank. I didn't think much of it and went back to my book. The next day, I got another text from the same number. This time it said, "Red really suits you." I was wearing a red dress. My heart started pounding. I walked over to the window, looked outside, and saw nothing unusual. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. That evening, I got another text. Dinner looks delicious. I was making pasta. I dropped the spoon and looked around my apartment, my hands shaking. It felt like someone was in the room with me, watching every move I made. I checked all the windows and doors, making sure they were locked. The texts kept coming, describing everything I did. You should get some rest. I was heading to bed. Nice pajamas. I was wearing my favorite PJs. I felt trapped in my own home, like there was no escape from whoever was watching me. I couldn't see any cameras or signs of someone being inside, but I felt their eyes on me all the time. I called my friend Jenny and told her what was happening. She was worried and offered to come over, but I told her I would be fine. I didn't want to drag anyone else into this mess. I decided to try and figure it out on my own. I stayed up all night, trying to find any clues, but there was nothing. Just more texts. The next day, I went to the police. They took my report but said there wasn't much they could do without more evidence. They told me to stay safe and contact them if anything escalated. I felt helpless and frustrated. The texts continued, getting more personal and detailed. You look tired. I hadn't slept in days. That's a beautiful necklace. I was wearing a necklace my mom gave me. You can't hide from me. I was curled up in the corner of my bedroom, feeling more terrified than ever. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started looking around my apartment again, more carefully this time. I checked behind picture frames, under furniture, and inside every little nook and cranny. Finally, I found a small camera hidden inside a vent in the living room. It was positioned to see almost the entire apartment. I felt sick to my stomach. I took the camera to the police, hoping they could trace it back to whoever was behind this. They said they would investigate, but it would take time. Meanwhile, the texts kept coming. Nice find. The stalker knew I found the camera. I felt more vulnerable than ever. I decided to stay at a hotel for a few nights, hoping to get away from the constant surveillance. But the texts followed me there too. Room 302, nice choice. My blood ran cold. I was no longer safe anywhere. I called Jenny again, and she insisted on staying with me. We both felt safer together, but the texts kept coming, describing everything we did. Having a friend over, I see. We tried to block the number, but new ones kept appearing. Desperate, we started searching online for any information that could help us. We found stories of other people experiencing similar things, but no clear solutions. We felt lost and scared. The texts became more threatening. You can't escape. I'm always watching. One night, while Jenny and I were talking, I got a text saying, "Look outside." We hesitated, but then peeked through the curtains. A figure was standing across the street, staring at my apartment. I couldn't make out their face, but I knew it was the stalker. We called the police again, but by the time they arrived, the figure was gone. Feeling completely trapped, we decided to stay with Jenny's brother, who lived out of town. We hoped the distance would help. For a few days, it was quiet. No texts, no signs of being watched. I started to relax, thinking it might finally be over. Then, one evening, a text came through. Nice place. The stalker had found us again. I felt like breaking down, but Jenny's brother, Mark, was determined to help. He had a background in security and promised to keep us safe. He set up cameras around his house and made sure all the doors and windows were secure. We stayed vigilant, waiting for any sign of the stalker. One night, we heard a noise outside. Mark checked the cameras and saw a figure trying to tamper with one of them. He called the police and went outside with a baseball bat to confront them. The stalker ran off before Mark could get a good look, but the police arrived quickly and started a search. They found a car parked a few blocks away with equipment inside for surveillance. The car was traced back to a man who had a history of stalking and harassment. He was arrested, and we finally felt a sense of relief. The police told us it would take time to gather enough evidence for a conviction, but at least he was off the streets for now. I moved to a new apartment with better security and kept in close contact with Jenny and Mark. The texts stopped, and I started to feel safe again. It took time to rebuild my sense of security, but I knew I had strong people around me to help. I was on a summer road trip, just me and the open road. I liked the freedom, the solitude. It was supposed to be a time to clear my head. One afternoon, I was driving through a quiet stretch of highway, fields on both sides, no other cars in sight. That's when I saw him, a guy standing by the side of the road, thumb out. He looked harmless enough, mid-30s, casual clothes, a small backpack. I decided to pick him up. I guess I was feeling generous or maybe just wanted someone to talk to. I pulled over, and he climbed in, thanking me profusely. He said his name was Dave, and he was trying to get to the next town over. We made small talk for a while, nothing serious. He seemed normal, grateful for the ride. But then, as we drove on, something about him started to feel off. It was little things at first. He kept glancing at me, and his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But then he started asking questions, too many questions. Where was I from? Where was I going? Did I live alone? It put me on edge. I tried to keep the conversation light, but he kept steering it back to personal stuff. I noticed he was getting more tense, his hands clenching and unclenching. My gut was telling me something was wrong, but I didn't know how to get out of it. I was stuck in the car with him in the middle of nowhere. Then he asked if I could pull over so he could use the restroom. I did, hoping maybe he would just get out and not come back. But he didn't leave his bag in the car, and when he got back, he seemed even more on edge. As we got back on the road, he started talking about how he needed money and how people didn't trust him. It clicked. This guy wasn't just some random hitchhiker. He was desperate. I decided to stay calm, keep driving, and figure out a plan. I couldn't just kick him out in the middle of nowhere. That might set him off. I noticed a gas station coming up, and I told him I needed to stop for gas. He agreed, but I could see he was suspicious. At the gas station, I tried to act normal. I went inside to pay and grabbed a snack, all the while thinking about how to get help. I saw a payphone outside and made a quick decision. I told him I was going to make a quick call to my mom, just to check in. He watched me closely but stayed in the car. I dialed 911, keeping my back to the car, and whispered to the operator what was happening. They told me to stay calm and that help was on the way. I hung up and walked back to the car, trying to keep my cool. Dave was getting more agitated, asking why I was taking so long. I made up some excuse about my mom needing something. As I got back into the car, I saw a police cruiser pull into the gas station. My heart was pounding. I told Dave I needed to use the restroom one more time before we left. He was really suspicious now, but he let me go. I walked towards the bathroom, but once I was out of his sight, I ran to the police car. I quickly told the officer what was happening, and they moved fast. They approached my car and asked Dave to step out. He tried to run, but they were on him in seconds, pinning him to the ground. They found a knife in his bag and realized he was a wanted fugitive. My instincts had been right. The officers thanked me for keeping calm and getting help. I was driving home from a weekend getaway, feeling relaxed after spending a few days out of town. It was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the highway. The road was empty, and I was looking forward to getting home and unwinding. As I was driving, I noticed a car pulled over on the side of the road with its hazard lights flashing. A man was standing next to it, looking around anxiously. He was waving his arms and seemed desperate for help. I was in a good mood and decided to stop and see if he needed assistance. When I pulled over, the man approached my truck. He looked relieved to see me and started explaining that his car had broken down and that he had no cell service to call for help. His story seemed plausible, and I offered to call a tow truck for him. He thanked me and said he would really appreciate it if I could just give him a ride to the nearest service station. He said it was only a few miles up the road and that he would arrange for a tow from there. I agreed, and he got into my truck. He seemed nervous but friendly enough. As we drove, the man started asking me about my plans and what I was doing out there. I answered his questions, but his behavior seemed increasingly odd. He would glance nervously out the window and seemed uncomfortable. I tried to stay positive and make small talk, but it was clear he was preoccupied. We were about halfway to the service station when he suddenly asked me to pull over. He said he had forgotten something in his car and needed to grab it quickly. I was confused but stopped the truck. He got out and went back to his broken-down car. I watched him through the rearview mirror. As I waited, I noticed more movement around his car. At first, I thought it was just the wind or shadows playing tricks, but then I saw other people approaching from the trees. They were dressed in dark clothing and seemed to be carrying something. My heart started racing as I realized the situation might not be as it seemed. The man returned to my truck, but now he had a different look on his face. He was no longer anxious, but rather had a cold, calculating look. I started to get a bad feeling, and when he got back in the truck, he told me to keep driving. His tone had changed, and it was clear he was no longer interested in a friendly conversation. Before I could react, the people from the trees started moving towards my truck. I could see they were carrying crowbars and other tools. Panic set in, and I realized I was in serious trouble. The man next to me quickly turned to face me, pulling out a knife. He demanded I hand over my keys and wallet. I tried to stay calm and think quickly. I knew I had to act fast. I pretended to comply, handing over my keys and wallet while my mind raced to find an escape plan. The thieves were closing in, and I could see their determined expressions. Just as one of them reached the truck, I made a split-second decision. I grabbed the gear shift and slammed it into reverse. The truck lurched backward, and the thief stumbled out of the way. I could hear shouting and yelling as the others scrambled to react. I managed to reverse the truck back onto the road and then sped off, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced in the mirror and saw the thieves running after me, but they quickly gave up as I drove away. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest police station, where I reported the attempted robbery. The police took my statement and sent officers to the scene. They found the abandoned car and some of the thieves' belongings but didn't manage to catch them. I was shaken but relieved to be safe. The experience left me wary and more cautious about stopping to help strangers in the future. It was a tough lesson learned, but I was grateful for my quick thinking and the fact that I managed to escape unharmed. Mike and I had always been curious about the old factory on the edge of town. It had been abandoned for years, and every time we drove past it, we talked about exploring it. One summer evening, we finally decided to go. We parked the car a few blocks away and walked to the factory. The sun was setting, and the place looked even more eerie in the fading light. We found a hole in the fence and slipped through. The air smelled of rust and decay. We crept inside through a broken window. The factory was dark and silent, except for the occasional creak of old metal. We used our flashlights to navigate the maze of machinery and empty rooms. It felt like stepping back in time. After a while, we found a stairway leading to the basement. Mike suggested we check it out, and I agreed. The stairs were steep and narrow, and the air grew colder as we descended. My flashlight flickered, and I hit it to make it stay on. The basement was massive and filled with old equipment and crates. We started exploring, but soon we heard footsteps. At first, we thought it was just the echo of our own steps, but then we realized it was coming from behind us. We turned around, but the beam of our flashlights revealed nothing. "Did you hear that?" Mike whispered. I nodded, feeling a knot in my stomach. We moved deeper into the basement, trying to stay quiet. We reached a large room with a heavy metal door. It was slightly ajar, and we squeezed through. Inside, we found makeshift beds, clothes, and canned food. It looked like someone had been living there. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us. We spun around, and there stood a group of people, their faces hard and unfriendly. They were dirty, with wild eyes. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. "You shouldn't be here," he growled. "This is our place." "We're sorry," I stammered. "We didn't know." "Sorry isn't good enough," he said. "We can't let you leave now. You've seen too much." Panic surged through me. Mike and I exchanged a desperate glance. We had to find a way out, but the squatters blocked the door. The tall man waved to his companions, and they started to circle us. "We don't want any trouble," Mike said, trying to sound calm. "We'll just leave and won't say anything to anyone." "No," the tall man said. "You're staying here." I looked around the room, searching for an escape. There was a small window high up on one wall, but it was too far to reach. The squatters were closing in, and my heart pounded in my chest. Then, Mike grabbed a rusty pipe from the floor and swung it at the nearest squatter. The man fell back, and I took the chance to push through the others. Mike followed, and we ran towards the door. We burst out of the room and sprinted through the basement. The squatters were right behind us, shouting and cursing. We reached the stairs and scrambled up, our footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. We reached the main floor, but the squatters were still chasing us. We had to find a way to slow them down. Mike grabbed an old metal shelf and tipped it over, blocking the stairway. We heard the squatters collide with it and curse loudly. We ran through the dark factory, our flashlights bobbing wildly. We found the window we had entered through and squeezed out, cutting ourselves on the broken glass. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. We jumped in and sped away, not daring to look back. My hands were shaking, and Mike's face was pale. We drove in silence, the factory receding into the night behind us. When we finally stopped, we sat in the car, trying to catch our breath. We had narrowly escaped, but the fear still gripped us. We had seen a side of life we never knew existed, and it had changed us. We never spoke of that night again, and we never went back to the factory. It started to rain just after I finished setting up my tent. The steady drumming on the canvas was kind of soothing at first. I was alone in a secluded spot I found by the river, looking forward to a quiet night. I'd had a long week and needed the break. As the evening went on, the rain got heavier. I sat under the small awning I'd rigged up, cooking some instant noodles on my little camp stove. The night was pitch black beyond the circle of light from my lantern, and the sound of the rain was almost deafening. I was halfway through my meal when I saw lights in the distance. At first, I thought it was another camper, but then I realized the lights were too bright and moving too fast. They were coming towards me. My heart started to race. I wasn't supposed to be here. I'd seen the private property signs but figured no one would care. Now it looked like I was wrong. The lights came closer, and I could make out voices. Angry voices. I quickly doused my stove and lantern, plunging myself into darkness. Maybe they wouldn't see me. The lights kept coming, though. Flashlights, and a lot of them. Then I heard footsteps sloshing through the mud. I crouched low, trying to make myself invisible. The rain was still pouring, making it hard to see or hear clearly. "Who's there?" a voice shouted. It was deep and rough. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. "We saw your light. Come out now." Another voice, just as rough. I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. They were almost at my camp. I took a deep breath and stood up, hands raised. "I'm sorry," I shouted over the rain. "I didn't know this was private property. I'll leave right away." They pointed their flashlights at me, blinding me. I could see the outline of 3 men. They were holding guns. "What are you doing here?" the first man demanded. "Camping," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm just camping. I didn't mean any harm." The men looked at each other, then back at me. One of them stepped forward and grabbed my backpack, rifling through it. "You spying on us?" he asked, throwing my stuff on the ground. No, I swear. "I'm just here to camp," I said. "Bullshit," another man said. "You're on private land. What's your real reason for being here?" I couldn't think. My mind was a blur of fear. "I didn't know," I repeated. "I'm sorry. I'll leave right now." The first man, who seemed to be the leader, came closer. I could see his face now, rough and scarred. "It's not that simple," he said. "You've seen too much." "Seen what?" "I haven't seen anything," I pleaded. They didn't believe me. They talked among themselves, voices low and serious. I caught bits and pieces. "Can't let him go. Might have called someone. What if he's lying?" "I don't know anything," I shouted, desperate. "Please, just let me go." The leader turned back to me, his eyes cold. "We can't take that chance," he said. "You're coming with us." They grabbed me, roughly binding my hands with rope. My heart pounded as they led me through the rain, away from my campsite. I stumbled and slipped in the mud, but they didn't slow down. We reached a clearing with a small cabin. They pushed me inside, the door slamming shut behind us. The cabin was dark and musty, with old furniture covered in dust. "Sit," the leader commanded, shoving me onto a chair. I sat, my mind racing. I had to think of a way out, but I was terrified. The men started questioning me again, but my answers didn't satisfy them. They were convinced I was spying on them for some reason. I saw a small window behind me, partially open. It was a slim chance, but maybe I could get out. They were distracted, arguing among themselves. I inched the chair back slowly, trying not to make a sound. "What are you doing?" one of them snapped, noticing my movement. "Nothing, just uncomfortable," I said quickly. The leader walked over and slapped me hard. "Don't try anything," he growled. I nodded, trying to stay calm. But inside, I was panicking. They went back to their argument, and I saw my chance. I waited until they were all looking away, then I bolted. I shoved the chair back and dove for the window. My hands were still tied, but I managed to wriggle through. "Hey!" one of them shouted. I hit the ground hard, but I didn't stop. I got up and ran, the rain blinding me. I heard them behind me, shouting and crashing through the underbrush. I ran for my life, not knowing where I was going. The rain was my only cover, the darkness my only ally. I stumbled and fell more times than I could count, but I kept going. I had to get away. Eventually, I found a road. I didn't know which way to go, but I chose a direction and ran. A car came by, and I waved it down. The driver stopped, looking at me with wide eyes. "Help me, please." I gasped. They let me in, and I collapsed in the back seat, soaked and exhausted. The driver took me to the nearest town, where I called the police. They went back to the property, but the men were gone. I was home alone during summer break. My parents were on a trip, and I had the house to myself. It was late, and I was lying in bed, almost asleep. Suddenly, I heard glass shattering downstairs. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to listen. I thought it might be a dream, but then I heard footsteps. I got out of bed quietly and crept to my bedroom door. I opened it a crack and peeked out into the hallway. It was dark and silent, but I could hear the faint sounds of movement downstairs. I needed to get my phone to call the police, but I had left it in the living room. I cursed myself for being so careless. I tiptoed out of my room and headed for the stairs, careful to avoid the creaky spots on the floor. As I got closer to the stairs, I heard voices. 2 men were talking in hushed tones. They sounded like they were searching for something. I crouched down and peeked through the banister. I could see shadows moving in the living room. I needed to find a way to get to my phone without being seen. I decided to go through the kitchen, which had a door that led to the living room. I slowly made my way downstairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached the kitchen and paused, listening. The men were still in the living room, their voices low but urgent. I moved quietly, inching towards the kitchen door. I opened it slowly, hoping it wouldn't creak. I could see the living room now. One of the men was rummaging through drawers, while the other was looking at the shelves. My phone was on the coffee table, just a few feet away from them. I took a deep breath and crawled on the floor, staying as low as possible. I moved slowly, my eyes never leaving the burglars. I was almost at the coffee table when one of them turned around. I froze, my heart stopping. He looked right at me, but he didn't seem to see me. I stayed perfectly still, praying he wouldn't notice. After a moment, he turned back to his search. I reached the coffee table and grabbed my phone. I crawled back to the kitchen, my heart still racing. I made it to the kitchen and closed the door behind me as quietly as I could. I dialed 911, my hands shaking. I whispered to the operator, telling them about the burglars. They said they would send officers right away and told me to stay hidden. I found a spot behind the kitchen counter where I could watch the living room door. I waited, my phone clutched in my hand. The burglars were still searching, oblivious to my presence. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. I heard one of the burglars say they needed to hurry up. They sounded frustrated, like they weren't finding what they were looking for. Finally, I heard sirens in the distance. The burglars heard them too and panicked. They grabbed a few things and ran towards the back door. I stayed hidden, not daring to move. I heard the back door slam and the sound of footsteps running away. The sirens grew louder, and soon I saw flashing lights outside. The police had arrived. I stayed behind the counter until I heard the police calling out, announcing their presence. I stood up and walked to the front door, my legs shaky. I opened the door and saw two officers standing there. They asked if I was okay, and I nodded, feeling a rush of relief. I told them what had happened, and they searched the house to make sure the burglars were gone. They took my statement and said they would investigate. I called my parents and told them what had happened. They were worried but glad I was safe. I spent the rest of the night in a daze, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The police never caught the burglars, but they said I did the right thing by staying hidden and calling for help. It was a terrifying experience, and I was just glad it was over.